Hey guys, imagine waking up before dawn, lantern in one hand, dreams of untold riches in the other, only to find your hands already blistered, your stomach rumbling, and your spine aching from the journey. 10 seconds in, and you're probably thinking, how bad could panning for gold really be? Well, buckle up, because if you thought your morning commute was rough, you haven't met the mosquitoes of Sacramento or the river rapids of the Sierra Nevada. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Part 1. Rolling the Dice on the American Dream. You've read the posters plastered up and down port towns from New York to New Orleans. Gold. Gold in California. The sailor's grunt turned into a shriek of opportunity. The clerk's ledger melted into feverish scribbles of supplies. By 1849, tens of thousands of souls, young and old, male and female, sober and frankly unhinged, were clamoring aboard creaking vessels bound for Chinatown. Just kidding, I mean California. They arrived with nothing but pocked lungs from sea air, a wallet full of IOUs, and a conviction that if you dig hard enough, liquid sunshine will spring from the earth in the form of pure gold. Of course, nobody tells you that those posters conveniently left out 3 little details. The voyage. If you thought a cheap bus ticket across town was cramped, wait until you're shoulder to shoulder with 200 other desperate prospectors in a steerage cabin subsisting on salted pork that's more brine than protein, seasick enough to redefine the term. One merchant captain bragged he could take all comers to San Francisco in 3 months. Translation: you'll trade half your ration tickets for the privilege of not drowning. The journey inland. Let's say you survived the scurvy, dysentery, and that one mutiny sparked by a missing keg of rum. Once you land in San Francisco, or the Golden Gate of Misery, you're faced with a hike over mountains, bridges washed out by spring floods, and rogue boulders that look like they're plotting to crush you for sport. Most newcomers paid guide services that promised safe passage for a modest fee, which usually meant parting with 3 months' wages for your oxen and wagon rental. And did I mention the mosquitoes? Mosquitoes the size of opossums. The law of the jungle. But in a tin roof tent or lean-to cobbled from scrap lumber, you discover that mining camps were less dew-kissed dawns and more gunshots at midnight. Claim disputes were settled not by polite arbitration, but by whoever could assemble the largest posse or launch the most dramatic threat, featuring the words, "I'll see you swinging from the nearest tree." Miners formed ad hoc courts, mercenary vigilantes, and eventually actual sheriffs, but only after a few too many bodies floated down the river to count. And all this before you even saw your first speck of gold. The equipment that breaks you. Prospectors arrived with high hopes and a pickaxe that weighed more than the average infant. They lugged pans, rockers, sluice boxes, contraptions that promised to amplify yield, but in reality amplified back pain. To strike a lucrative pocket, you had to spend hours, days, weeks swinging that pickaxe into gravel-laden riverbanks, scooping up handfuls of mud, back-breaking work in freezing water that sapped both strength and morale. Needle-sharp rocks cut into hands and ankles. That sluice box. Great if you want to risk an infection from a rusty nail. Pack trips to haul supplies up narrow switchback trails meant chewing on hardtack until your jaw cracked, and packing an extra pair of boots was laughable. Most boots disintegrated under the weight of mud and fatigue within a month. Last I checked, prospect didn't originally mean become prospector's amputee, but semantics evolve under duress. Food, the real luxuries. Fancy a hot meal? Huh? By late 1849, the supply chain had collapsed under its own optimism. The price of a single egg soared to $1, nearly 20 times its East Coast value. Bread crumbs masquerading as bread sold for a king's ransom, and coffee, coffee, was brewed from ground so nasty you'd swear it was pulverized oak bark. The staple diet became beans, and more beans, served with the occasional surprise rock or shard of metal. If you strayed too far from camp, bears and wolves eyed you like a rare delicacy. Hunters supplied fresh meat, but only if you paid through the nose. Literally, if you lost a tent peg in a poker game, you might trade it for a slab of buffalo that smelled like regret. Alcohol flowed freely because nothing says handling depression like a jug of rot gut whiskey kept at 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer sun. Disease, your invisible partner in crime. Let's not forget miners' consumption, aka tuberculosis, which thrived in damp creek beds and crowded tents. Dysentery ran rampant. One mug of river water too many, and suddenly your prospects turned into an impromptu colon cleanse with a fatality rate. Malaria found its sticky foothold in the warmer valleys, and smallpox reared its ugly head among unvaccinated newcomers, leading to quarantine camps that felt like open-air morgues. Medical care? A broken promise. Frontier doctors were often quacks with diplomas from correspondence courses, wielding leeches, mercury bombs, and dubious tonics. One prospector claimed that after 2 buckets of mercury-flavored elixir, he felt nothing but emptiness, except his wallet felt a lot lighter. The mirage of wealth now, every year a few prospectors struck it rich, but for every Levi who found his mother lode, there were hundreds who sank deeper in debt. Shipping costs for returning east with sacks of gold dust often ate up half your treasure. Then came taxes, claim fees, and the obligatory tithe to the local protection gang. By the time you counted your coins, you might envy the poor souls who never left home. And consider the timing. Claim jumping became so popular that the simple phrase, "Don't jump my claim," became the 19th century version of "respect my boundaries." Only here, boundaries included a half-mile stretch of riverbed and an angry man with a Winchester rifle. Loneliness, the final frontier. If misery had a soundtrack, it would be the hollow echo of your own footsteps as you trudge back to camp alone after a day yielding nothing but soggy gravel. No letters arrived, they took months to travel east, and if the ship sank, poof, your correspondence was fish food. News from home consisted of rumors and a single traveling salesman who might mention that your sister's baby was about to walk. Meanwhile, the sun baked you, the wind whipped you, and the gold stayed hidden like an overprotective parent. The turning point, toward the end of your first year. Hunger mixed with hopelessness. You looked at your hands, the same hands that gripped the pickaxe and washed rocks in the river. You realized they'd never belonged to a man of comfortable profession. Like a banker whose biggest danger was misplacing a decimal. You asked yourself, was it worth trading my health, my safety, and my sanity for the mere possibility of a few lumps of yellow metal? And so, with shoulders hunched and dignity in tatters, many prospectors slipped away at night, slipping back to ports to sign aboard ships heading home. They might carry a handful of gold flakes as proof of their bravery or folly, but mostly they carried stories of blizzards, of market cries, of bodies carried downriver in crude coffins, and of an America that offered hope but charged interest in misery. Tune in next time for part 2, where we'll dive into the brutal reality of claim staking, the rise of the crooked company store, and a cliffhanger showdown over who really owns your gold. Spoiler alert, it's never you. Welcome back, brave hypothetical gold prospector. If you somehow survived your first year of dysentery, broken dreams, and the occasional bear encounter without being shot over a game of cards, congratulations. You're now qualified to enter the next, even stupider phase of the California gold rush. It's time to learn about the fine print of the American dream, how even when you find gold, you still lose. Claim, staking, the original real estate scam. Ah yes, claim staking, the sacred ritual of picking a patch of dirt by the river, marking it with sticks or stones, and declaring to anyone who'd listen, "This here's mine." The only catch? Absolutely no one respected it. The rules were basically a fever dream. In theory, mining districts created their own laws, but enforcement was up to whoever had the biggest group of friends with guns. If you wandered off to relieve yourself or grab a drink, someone might quite literally erase your claim marker and put theirs in its place. And unless you wanted to settle it by trial, which meant a bunch of equally drunk, exhausted men pretending to be a jury in a tent, you either fought it out or gave up. In one infamous incident in Nevada City, a prospector left his claim to attend his brother's funeral. By the time he got back 2 days later, 4 different people had laid claim to his dirt, built shacks on it, and started mining. A 5th guy was charging admission to spectators watching the fight over whose it really was. Spoiler, it wasn't his anymore. The company store, where hope goes to die. If the mining camps had a villain more dangerous than cholera, it was the company store. You see, prospectors couldn't haul everything with them. So enterprising businessmen built general stores where you could buy everything from a shovel to stale tobacco. Sounds convenient, right? Not when a pound of flour costs $20, a single candle $10, and a used pair of boots more than a farm back east. Prices fluctuated based on the owner's mood, the weather, or the number of unlucky fools in town. During heavy rains when no wagons could get through, prices skyrocketed, and you couldn't just pack up and leave. Without supplies, the odds of starving in the mountains went from likely to guaranteed. Worse, many prospectors worked for companies rather than themselves. They dug from dawn till dusk, only to be paid in company-issued scrip, redeemable only at the same store that sold $40 pickaxes. It was a flawless trap. One man reportedly spent an entire season mining gold for a company, cashed out his scrip, and discovered he could afford a sack of beans and a comb. Fool's gold, nature's cruelest joke. Now, imagine you've spent 6 months breaking your back in a riverbed, your fingernails blackened, your face permanently sunburned, and you finally see a glitter in the pan. Eureka! Except, no. It's pyrite, also known as fool's gold, and it was responsible for more heartbreak in the gold rush than bad whiskey and venereal disease combined. Pyrite has a nasty habit of looking exactly like gold to an untrained eye. The only way to tell the difference was to smash it with a rock. Real gold bends, pyrite shatters. You'd better believe entire camps were littered with hopeful prospectors testing their haul, only to feel their hearts drop as their fortune crumbled into useless dust. Some grew so desperate they convinced themselves the pyrite might have gold inside it. Men lost weeks grinding fool's gold in makeshift mills, swearing by legends of hidden veins. One man insisted on eating a tiny piece daily to draw the gold out of his system. Spoiler, it did not work. Dueling and dying over dirt, tensions in mining camps ran hotter than a tin shack in July. Disputes weren't settled with words. They were settled with pistols, knives, clubs, and occasionally large sticks named things like Widowmaker or the Equalizer. Duels were technically illegal, which meant they happened constantly. Over poker games, over stolen boots, and especially over mining claims. The classic image of two men standing back to back, walking 10 paces and turning to shoot, was replaced by the far more realistic scene of one man getting ambushed outside an outhouse at 3 a.m. Vigilante justice was the flavor of the day. Ad hoc courts would form after a particularly messy dispute. The jury, whoever wasn't too drunk to stand. The punishment, often hanging, sometimes being tied to a tree and left for the wolves. In one camp, a man accused of theft was sentenced to dig his own grave before being hanged. When he finished, the crowd felt bad and let him go. Life in the camps, an ode to filth. Mining camps were essentially mud pits lined with broken dreams and the constant stench of unwashed men. Tents offered little protection against rain, rats, or the neighbor's persistent snoring. Sanitation was a distant concept. Most people relieved themselves in shallow pits, and disease spread like wildfire. Food was either burnt to a crisp or dangerously raw. Bread baked over open fires was often made from flour crawling with bugs. One prospector wrote home that he learned to appreciate the extra protein. Soup consisted of river water, bones, and whatever roots someone didn't recognize as poisonous. Entertainment? If you didn't die at work or get shanked in a card game, you spent your evenings drinking rot-gut whiskey strong enough to dissolve a spoon and listening to a harmonica player butcher the same 3 songs every night. Occasionally, a traveling show would arrive with a toothless fiddler or a dancing bear, neither of whom wanted to be there any more than you did. Predators of a different kind. No, not mountain lions, though those existed too. I mean the human kind. Con men, gamblers, and snake oil salesmen thrived in the chaos. They sold miracle tonics that cured everything from gout to heartbreak. Spoiler, it was whiskey laced with opium. Card sharks ran elaborate scams with loaded dice and marked cards. Entire gambling dens sprang up inside tents with fortunes won and lost overnight. Most were rigged, and even if you did win, someone might just follow you into the woods and make sure you never spent your winnings. The women of the gold rush. Women were scarce in the camps, which made them both highly respected and aggressively harassed, depending on who you asked. Some ran boarding houses or laundry businesses, making more money in a week than most men made in a month. Others ran saloons or dance halls where a single drink or a 2-minute dance cost a nugget of gold. A few were prospectors themselves, defying every social expectation. One famed woman prospector, known as Poker Annie, earned a reputation for out-drinking and out-shooting the men around her. When asked what she was looking for in a husband, she allegedly replied, "A pulse, and not necessarily a strong one." And still they came. Despite the misery, the deaths, and the increasingly bleak odds, the trickle of newcomers never stopped. Ships continued to arrive at San Francisco Bay, and wagon trains kept pushing over the mountains. Each one carried fresh-faced fools who believed they'd be the lucky exception. By 1852, it was clear to everyone except those still arriving that the easy gold was gone. The shallow riverbed dust had been scraped clean, and serious mining required expensive equipment and deep shafts. Many of the richest fortunes were made not by prospectors, but by merchants, suppliers, and banks who thrived on the desperation of men chasing a fading dream. The great irony. In the end, the California gold rush was less about gold and more about selling the illusion of gold. It was America's first national lottery, where the house always won. The rivers gave up their treasure grudgingly, and for every man who struck it rich, 1,000 left with nothing but a cough, a scar, and a lifelong distrust of glittery things. Next time in Part 3, we'll follow the prospectors who refused to give up, delving into the rise of hydraulic mining, the environmental devastation it unleashed, and the brutal conflicts between miners and displaced Native American tribes. Spoiler, it does not get any better. By now, you've survived the back-breaking pick-and-pan routine, navigated murderous card games, and watched your fellow prospectors keel over from every disease known to 19th century medicine. Congratulations, you're officially jaded enough to embrace the next innovation in gold-getting, hydraulic mining. That's right, the same pioneers who scoffed at mechanized contraptions now begged engineers to build water cannons capable of blasting entire hillsides into submission. What could go wrong? First, you needed water, lots of it. So engineers carved miles of ditches, flumes, and aqueducts through the mountains, diverting rivers into wooden troughs that snaked like giant wooden snakes above canyon floors. Then came the delivery system, the monitor, a water cannon with the gentle touch of a fire hose on meth. One prospector described it as an angry river in a cannon, screaming at the earth until it gives up its secrets. You'd set up your sluice box downstream, point the monitor at the hillside, pull the lever, and watch gallons of pressurized water turn solid rock and soil into mud slurry that dripped with microscopic flecks of gold. It sounded perfect, massive throughput, minimal manual labor, a guaranteed yield. Except the geology doesn't play fair. Hillsides crumbled unpredictably, sending landslides roaring down, flattening camps, smashing equipment, and burying claim markers. You know, the sacred sticks and stones you spent weeks placing. Many a prospector lost more than his dignity in those mud flows. One client of the hydraulic cummers reported his entire lean-to washing away like a tissue in a bathtub. His greatest treasure? A half-eaten stale biscuit clinging to a floating floorboard. Soon enough, environmental devastation hit like a tsunami. Rivers choked on sediment, fish populations collapsed, and entire valley floors turned into moonscapes of barren gravel. Farmers downstream, who had never asked for your 2 cents, watched their fertile fields vanish under layers of mining debris. Irrigation canals clogged, roads became impassable quagmires, and towns that once celebrated your arrival now cursed your name in church every Sunday. Local newspapers published cartoons of gold rushers as mud monsters, portraits of men grinning with pickaxes dripping with sludge. But hey, you're a prospector. Money talks louder than morality, or so you thought, until dozens of farmers joined forces to sue the mining companies. Courtrooms filled with testimonies about ruined livelihoods, destroyed homes, and cattle stumbling in sediment-laden streams. One plaintiff, a widowed homesteader, tearfully described how her trusty cow, Bessie, inexplicably developed a taste for raw earth, then keeled over, buried under 8 feet of gravel. You watched jurors exchange horrified glances as lawyers slammed monitors onto evidence tables like oversized hammers. The judges, half-numbered by the legal complexity, ordered injunctions, temporary pauses on hydraulic operations. Cue a prospector riot that would make any modern-day protest seem like a polite garden party. Men with wooden pipes and mud-streaked faces marched into courthouses demanding our right to wash away your orchard. Deputized miners, who'd never worn a badge before, shoved farmers out of the way, waving mining maps like manifestos. The sheriff, caught between two armed crowds, reportedly leaned out his office window, lit a cigar, and muttered, "Might as well pick a side and shoot." While you cheered for unfettered access to gold-laden gravels, you soon discovered that litigation moved slower than a mule train. Injunctions froze your hydraulic monitor for months at a time. Meanwhile, your loan on the equipment accumulated interest like a debt-ridden miser counting the cost of his folly. Boards creaked, pipes leaked, and creditors waited with sharpened quills to tally your ruin. If you cherished autonomy, this was the modern equivalent of being shackled by red tape instead of iron. And let's not forget the ecological karma. Those downstream floods of muck didn't just bury farms, they rerouted entire watersheds. Towns that once relied on salmon runs found fish carcasses rotting in pools of sludge. Disease-bearing mosquitoes bred en masse in stagnant tailings ponds. Typhoid outbreaks, previously rare in mountain hamlets, became annual spectacles. You might have dodged dysentery in 1849, but by 1853 you were praying to avoid cholera carried on silt-laden winds. Meanwhile, displaced Native American tribes, whose lands you trampled en route to gold, watched in exasperation. They'd already suffered forced relocations, broken treaties, and violent skirmishes. Now, their sacred rivers and fishing grounds turned into toxic sludge flows. In some regions, tribes formed alliances with farmers and sympathizing settlers to stake petitions and lobby territorial legislatures. One delegation of Miwok leaders traveled 50 miles on foot, paper copies of treaties in hand, only to be told, "Those paper things don't mean much here." Violence erupted again, this time along sluice-lined streams. Prospectors, drunk on both whiskey and the arrogance of manifest destiny, fired warning shots at tribal fishermen who waded through silt to collect what little fish remained. Retaliation followed: burned sluice boxes, stolen horses, and ambushes on supply wagons. You thought the wilderness was your foe, but the real conflict was human. Clashes over land, water, and an ideology that placed profit above all. Morality aside, the economics turned absurd. Hydraulic mining yielded gold at princely rates for a few years, but as the good gravels depleted, companies scrambled to blast bedrock with black powder, literally blowing up entire hillsides. That cost money, lots of it, and required skilled blasters who often miscalculated charges. One bungled explosion leveled an entire gulch, including the mining camp and half the monitor system, sending a shockwave that shattered windows in a boomtown 3 miles away. Claims became the stuff of ghost stories, camps haunted not by spirits, but by creditors demanding payment for explosives never delivered. As yields plunged, mining companies folded faster than a carnival tent in a windstorm. Contractors swallowed heavy losses, foremen fled to Nevada for Comstock load fever, and hydraulic monitors lay rusting in abandoned flumes. You, ever the optimist, surveyed the wreckage and wondered if the next gold strike might lie under that pile of twisted iron. Early chroniclers called this the second bust of the gold rush, but in reality it felt like the third or fourth, depending on how many lawsuits you'd lost. If by some miracle you still had gold dust in your pocket, you faced the final gauntlet: shipping. Butterfield overland mail couriers charged per ounce, steamer lines tacked on insurance fees, and border customs in Panama demanded bribes. Some prospectors literally sold pieces of their soul, signing indenture contracts to repay shipping debts. A handful signed on as sailors for the return voyage, just to avoid deportation for unpaid bills. Homebound ships were crowded, stench-filled, and risked pirate attacks in the Caribbean. Pirates who, ironically, would have appreciated the ease of hydraulic mining's golden mud slurry. Back home, your story took a dark, comedic turn. Neighbors asked if you'd struck it rich. You gazed at your tattered boots and shrugged. Friends expected tales of fast wealth and quick returns. You offered anecdotes of lawsuits, mudslides, and abandoned monitors. Your only souvenirs were trench foot, permanent hearing loss from explosions, and letters from ungrateful creditors. Your family stuck you in suits so you'd look respectable at Sunday dinners. God only knew what you tried to explain over roast beef. So here you stand at the end of part 3, knee-deep in legal filings and environmental ruin, scratching your head and asking, why did I ever think gold would solve my problems? You've seen nature weaponized against itself, watched communities tear themselves apart, and financed it all with borrowed coin. And yet, here you are, still waking up before dawn, lantern in hand, dreams of untold riches flickering like that weak flame. Stay tuned for part 4, where we confront the final indignity: infrastructure collapse, the rise of corporate mining titans, and the once-in-a-lifetime but fleeting opportunity to leave California with just enough gold to afford counseling. Because if there's one lesson from the gold rush, it's that the real treasure might just be hindsight. By now, you've weathered the blistering slog of pick and pan, watched hillsides explode under hydraulic monitors, and tangled in lawsuits worthy of Shakespearean tragedy. If you still believe that gold is your ticket to Easy Street, prepare for the last act of this ludicrous drama: infrastructure collapse, the rise of corporate mining titans, and your bittersweet escape from the world's most expensive mud bath. The rise of the mining barons. When individual prospectors floundered, a new breed of colossus stepped in. The mining companies with pockets deeper than the Sierra crevices they blasted. These corporate titans brought heavy machinery, steam engines, stamp mills, and even experimental mercury retorts, tools so monstrous that a lone prospector's pickaxe looked like a toothpick. They bought up dozens of small claims, bulldozed entire hillsides, and turned the gold fields into industrial zones humming with mechanical roars. You'd think this shift heralded prosperity for everyone. After all, mass production equals mass profits, right? Wrong. The companies employed thousands of laborers, many of them recent immigrants, on wages so low you'd have better luck spending your entire paycheck on a single loaf of bread at the old company store. Safety regulations were about as existent as a snowstorm in Sacramento. Boiler explosions, stamp mill accidents, and mercury poisoning became the part of the daily toll, with injuries so gruesome they'd sour the stomach of any self-respecting mortician. When towns turned to dust, as the booming companies swallowed small claims, infrastructure struggled to keep pace. Roads churned into quagmires under the weight of steam tractors. Bridges donated by hopeful settlers collapsed under the weight of ore-laden wagons. Supply lines, once lifelines of food, medicine, and whiskey, stretched thin across treacherous mountain passes. Inns that once boasted hot supper and warm beds posted signs reading "beds by reservation, if you're lucky." By the mid-1850s, many boomtowns resembled deranged carnival rides stalled halfway. Half-built saloons, half-collapsed hotels, and half-empty wallets. The unsung heroes of these settlements, blacksmiths, seamstresses, and school teachers, saw their patronage vanish as men chased ever deeper veins of gold. Ghost towns sprouted overnight. One morning you'd toast at the local tavern. The next you'd wander among rotting floorboards and broken bottles. Rumor had it that owls hooted Eureka in the empty saloons, mocking the dreams once built on those dusty boards. The environmental payback. Remember when the rivers ran clear and birds sang above your sluice box? Those days are gone, replaced by tailings ponds that glisten like oil slicks under the sun. The corporate mining methods of deep shaft blasting and mercury amalgamation left scars so deep that entire watersheds were rerouted, fisheries collapsed, and once fertile valleys turned to steel-hard clay. Where wildflowers once bloomed, nothing grew but tumbleweeds and the occasional opportunistic cactus. Local newspapers, once eager to promote fresh gold discoveries, started running obituaries of ecosystems. Farmers downstream filed class action suits likening the mining runoff to the poisoned blood of the Golden Hills. A few sympathetic engineers proposed rudimentary sediment traps. The mining barons dismissed these ideas as financially inconvenient. You could practically hear the echo. We can't mine for gold if we have to clean up after ourselves. Debt, despair, and desperation. Coal-fired stamp mills required constant fuel, so miners borrowed from company agents at exorbitant interest rates. By the time gold prices dipped in the late 1850s, many small operators found their debts outstripped any remaining ore value. Indentured servants, often teenagers and recent immigrants, worked off those debts in a system that looked suspiciously like bondage. Families rationed food to feed the mill workers, only to see their meager stores requisitioned for the greater good of keeping the engines running. Mental health crises skyrocketed. Frontier doctors, still armed with leeches and mercury concoctions, were overwhelmed by patients suffering from gold fever psychosis. a condition marked by obsessive gold-washing rituals, delusions of hidden mother lodes, and occasional self-harm. When a pan failed to yield a single speck, as public as this madness was, it was treated in private rooms to avoid scaring off potential investors. After all, who wants to back a profitable mining venture if they think your workforce is teetering on the edge of collective hysteria? The final stampede, panic, and plague. In 1857, news of a financial panic on the East Coast reached California shores. Investors who once showered mining companies with capital suddenly froze, credit lines snapped shut, and the price of gold dipped alongside the hopes of thousands. Payrolls were slashed, workers were laid off by the dozen. Company stores hiked prices further, citing market volatility, but everyone knew it was simply cruelty in a new package. As men lost jobs and savings, tent riots erupted. Thousands rallied in San Francisco, marching on corporate offices with banners reading, "We want work," and "Stop printing profits on our misery." Authorities responded with tear gas canisters, the first recorded use of chemical crowd control in the West in mass arrests. These tactics only fueled the anger, and prison cells filled with penniless miners who'd once dreamed of riches. A few months later, a dysentery outbreak swept through the jails, claiming more lives than the riots themselves. The Great Exodus. With the landscape ravaged and their spirits broken, many prospectors decided to cut their losses. Word spread of fresh strikes in Colorado, Nevada's Comstock Lode, and even as far as Australia. Wagon trains formed convoys once more, this time carrying haggard souls eager to escape the legacy of broken picks and buried hopes. Some ventured back east, penniless and wary. Others stayed on the rails, heading toward new frontiers with fresh dreams, and unfortunately, the same played-out playbook of hardship. Those who remained in California transitioned to secondary industries, lumber, railroads, and agriculture. Yet even these fields bore the gold rush's scars. Fertile valleys lay buried under silt. Rivers ran warm with acid runoff. Forests had vanished to fuel steam engines. Pioneers who once sang songs of promise now worked as sharecroppers on lands so weary they refused to yield crops. A moment of reflection. As you pack your meager bundle of supplies, your blanket threadbare, your pickaxe warped, your soul several sizes too heavy, you might wonder, was any of this worth it? You clasp that tiny pouch of gold dust, enough to buy a horse, a set of clothes, and maybe a proper meal somewhere civilized. But as you sling it over your shoulder, the weight of history bears down, reminding you that gold was never more than a glittering lie. On the coach to San Francisco, you watch the horizon, half expecting a massive sluice box to rise up and blast the earth once more. Instead, you see distant chimneys belching smoke from lumber mills and rail yards, a different kind of delusion, promising progress but often delivering pollution. You catch your reflection in the coach window, gaunt cheeks, haunted eyes, the faintest glimmer of regret. The last joke, counseling and closure. By the time you reach the wharf, even the shipping lines have fees so convoluted that deciphering them requires a degree in interpretive accounting. Duty taxes, insurance levies, handling charges, each line item a barb and a ledger of despair. You sign the paperwork with a trembling hand, paying half your gold dust just for the privilege of escaping. On deck, as the ship chugs away from the coast, you realize the final absurdity. You'll need counseling to process this ordeal. The latest craze in San Francisco is gold rush therapy, where you pay professionals, often ex-miners themselves, to listen to your horror stories, nod sympathetically, then prescribe rest, diet, and moderate opium tincture. And because nothing says, healing like exchanging more money, each session costs a king's ransom. As you clutch your receipt for 20 sessions, you laugh, a hollow, sardonic sound that echoes across the deck. In the distance, you see the Golden Gate shrink to a narrow slit in the horizon. You close your eyes, imagining a life unshackled by sluice boxes and script, where gold is just a color in a child's crayon box, and not a siren song dragging you through mud, lawsuits, and madness. Epilogue. Hindsight and the real treasure. In later years, historians would call the California Gold Rush a pivotal moment in American expansion, a crucible that forged cities, railroads, and a national mythology of rugged individualism. But as you sip your last cup of clean coffee, no more stale flour biscuits, you know the true lesson. The real treasure lies not in the glitter of the earth, but in the stories you live to tell, in the lessons you carry forward. So here ends our saga of dust, despair, and dollar signs. 4 parts of madness, mayhem, and the maddening pursuit of a metal that burned brighter in imagination than in reality. If you ever find yourself longing for adventure, remember this tale, that sometimes the greatest fortunes are counted not in gold nuggets, but in the hard-won wisdom of knowing when to walk away. And that, my friends, is why you wouldn't want to be a gold prospector in the 1849 California gold rush. Hey guys, picture this. You're clinging to a slippery oar as the salty spray stings your eyes, the deck beneath you tilting with every crashing wave. And then a flaming projectile screams overhead, lighting up the night sky like some deranged fireworks display. 10 seconds later, your galley's ram smacks into an enemy trireme with the force of a charging rhinoceros, splintering wood, throwing your captain overboard, and flooding your hold with icy Mediterranean water. Sounds like a dream vacation, right? Part 1, From Citizen to Oar Slave, the Recruitment and Training Nightmare. You've heard of the glory of Rome, its marble temples, its disciplined legions, its victory parades through the Forum. But naval service? That's a one-way ticket to misery. Unless you're born into a patrician family with years of rowing practice in your pedigree, your prospects begin with conscription or voluntary enlistment because you're desperate for coin, cheap food, or a chance to escape your landlord's endless rent demands. Once you've signed up, there's no olive branch handshake or welcome aboard party. Instead, you report to the nearest naval dockyard, Ostia, Miseno, or Alexandria, and shuffle through a gauntlet of branding irons, official paperwork, and rumor-mongering veterans claiming that half the fleet sinks on its maiden voyage from poor. Maintenance alone. The anatomy of the galley. Your home for the next several years is a narrow, 3-tiered galley, some 120 feet long and 18 feet wide, with rows of oars sticking out like the bristles of a sea-hardened toothbrush. Above you sits the fighting deck, more a rickety platform than a sturdy floor, lined with archers, marines, and officers glaring down at you with the smug assurance of men who've never sweated on a bench. Beneath, you cram shoulder to shoulder with 170 other rowers, your oar sliding through holes in the hull called oar ports, each movement choreographed to the beat of a drummer who seems to relish every wrong stroke. Rations, living conditions, and disease. Food on board consists of hardtack so dense it can crack teeth, salted meat that tastes like leather, and thin porridge boiled in brackish water, whatever you fetch from the nearest port. Fresh fruit? Forget it unless friendly merchants toss you a moldy fig in pity. Water is rationed in small wooden barrels, often fouled by seaweed and barnacles. You'll learn to cherish every drop. Sleeping quarters are non-existent. You either collapse on the slippery deck between oar benches or cling to a wooden crossbeam overhead, legs dangling amid the stench of sweat, fish guts, and human waste. Rats infest the hull, nipping at your toes when you dare close your eyes. Lice and fleas breed freely in your tunic, feasting on your skin until pockets of itching madness force you to scratch your uniform raw. If that weren't enough, the Mediterranean climate is a breeding ground for malaria and dysentery. Close quarters turn minor illnesses into deadly epidemics. One cough in the hold, and soon half the rowers are too weak to lift an oar. The ship's medic, usually a quack with a handful of herbal pamphlets, resorts to bloodletting, hot poultices, and a mysterious tonic that smells suspiciously like vinegar and pine resin. Drill, drill, and drill some more, before you ever smell the metallic tang of battle. Your days revolve around relentless drill. The drumbeat dictates your life. Row when it pounds, stop when it ceases, reverse when it changes rhythm. You practice maneuvers designed to ram enemy ships, called Corvus boarding tactics, though the real Corvus is the crowbar-like boarding bridge that sometimes snaps under its own weight, sending boarding parties plunging into the sea. You learn to row in perfect unison, 8 strokes left, 8 strokes right, quick turn, full speed ahead. If one man falls out of sync, your ship veers off course and you risk stabbing your own comrades with your oar. Discipline is absolute. Failing to follow orders can earn you the corporal lash, a whip made from braided rawhide, delivered publicly at the bow to terrify any other slacker into compliance. The flawed morale booster. To break the monotony, Centurions stage mock battles at dawn. 2 ships side by side, each crew alternately rams the other, practicing evasive zigzags and boarding drills. But these are friendly encounters. and more than one man has cracked his skull on the opposing galley's ram. Competition for glory runs high. If you win, you earn a wreath and bragging rights. If you lose, you're mocked as a landlubber for the rest of the season. Storms, shipwrecks, and the gods' whims. Training doesn't prepare you for nature's fury. A sudden gale in the Tyrrhenian Sea can swell waves high enough to flood the ore decks, tipping lightweight galleys like overturned turtles. If your captain miscalculates latitude or underestimates a squall, you'll find yourself dashed against rocks, your hull splintering, and perhaps your tethered oars dragged you overboard. Romans believed the sea was ruled by Neptune and his capricious nymphs. Superstitions flourish. No one eats pork on Tuesdays, no one whistles under the awning, and no one cuts their fingernails on the quarterdeck. One unlucky sailor who broke the taboo was said to have cursed the ship, prompting an officer to toss him overboard as an offering. No funeral rites, just a farewell wave to the sea gods. The build-up to battle. After months of training and patrols, scouting pirate lairs, escorting grain ships, or simply terrorizing merchant vessels, the day finally arrives when your admiral summons the fleet. You don your cuirass, hoist your helmet, and march up the steep ramp onto the fighting deck. Legionaries with pila, javelins, and wicker shields stand ready. Archers string their bows. The air fills with anticipation, fear, and the stench of oiled leather. Orders bark across the deck. Form the line of battle, hold the line, await the signal. In the distance, you spot enemy sails, Carthaginian, Cilician pirate, or perhaps the rebellious forces of a Mediterranean province. Each side sizes up the other. You glance down at your oar team, gaunt faces, eyes hollow, muscles quivering from the endless drilling. No one speaks. You'd whisper encouragement, but the slightest breeze carries sound poorly across the water. The first clash. Then the trumpet blares. Your heart leaps into your throat as you secure your oar, legs braced. The ship surges forward, wood groaning, oars dipping in unison. Your target, the enemy's left flank where their line is thinnest. At 50 yards, the lead ships close in. You see them load archers with flaming arrows. The sky ignites, a volley that rains scorching death. Men scream as flames catch in sails and shields. Your deck erupts in chaos. Marines scramble to pour water on burning ropes. You strain at your oar, each stroke sending your galley inches closer. Quartermasters push enemies away with long poles. The triremes ram, the rostrum, comes into view, a bronze-plated projection designed to pierce hulls. You pray your captain angles the ship just right. Too low, and you pierce the hold. Too high, and you ride up, capsizing when the two ships lock together. And that's where part 1 ends, your galley trembling as it prepares to plunge, splinter timbers poised to unleash violence, and you, a mere cog in Rome's relentless war machine, wondering if you'll ever see dry land again. Stay tuned for part 2, where we dive headfirst into the blood, betrayal, and boarding frenzy that awaits once hulls crack and soldiers storm the deck. As the rostrum of your galley smashes into the enemy's hull, you're thrown forward, teeth clattering like broken chariot wheels. Splinters fly everywhere. Some lodge in your tunic, others embed in your thigh, and a geyser of seawater explodes between decks. The boards shudder beneath your boots as you catch a glimpse of the enemy's rowers, their own oars frozen mid-stroke, faces contorted in panic. Chaos unleashed. Before you can process the impact, the fight erupts. Legionaries on deck leap across the gash, shields locked, pila at the ready. You shoulder aside a stunned archer and chase after a Carthaginian who's trying to scuttle their ship's steering oar. The deck tilts perilously. Water surges in, turning every step into a battle against both enemy and drowning. Each swing of your gladius sends a shower of red across the planks, but your first kill splatters blood so close to your eyes that you taste iron on your tongue. Around you, marines from both sides hurl grappling hooks, ropes entangle spikes in the bulwarks, and auxiliary archers pepper the chaos with arrows tipped in Greek fire. Screams echo. Some are the rallying cries of your comrades, others the panicked shrieks of rowers trampled underfoot. The galley's surgeon, if you can call him that, skips between the fray, shouting, "Medicus!" as he patches slashes with wool soaked in vinegar and cauterizes wounds with a red-hot poker. You briefly consider asking for a nurse, but the nearest one is elbow deep in a dying man's entrails, falling through the decks. During the melee, someone loosens the grating above your rowing bench. It gives way under the weight of two charging Marines. One Roman, one enemy, and you're plunged into darkness. You land in the hold on a pile of discarded hemp rope and rotting grain sacks, the stench so potent it knocks the breath out of you. Rats scurry across your chest, nipping at exposed flesh. You scramble to your feet, only to feel the deck sway as your ship heels from the weight of shipped water. Ahead, a sluice of seawater pours through the ram hold, turning the lower decks into a miniature flood. You spot a ladder hammered through the beams and clamber up, fish slicked wood biting into your palms. Emerging on the fighting deck, you see that the enemy vessel has wedged alongside yours, oars interlocked like prison bars. The two ships rock in unison, and every wave threatens to slam you into the opposite hull. You're too close to back off. Your only option is forward. Boarding bridge. Debacles. A centurion bellows in order, and Marines roll out the corvus, a gangplank with iron hooks at its end. It creaks ominously as they pivot it across the gap. You watch as the first boarding party crosses, 8 men in lorica segmentata, shields raised. Halfway across, the corvus groans and shudders, like a beast overburdened, then snaps. The unsupported end tips upward, sending 4 Marines plummeting into the sea, their shouts drowned by the crashing surf. The survivors stagger back, bleeding and cursing you in a dozen dialects. Undeterred, your captain signals to lower the second bridge. This time, you're on it. You step forward, shield locked, sword drawn. The deck beneath your foot is slick with blood and oil. You push off, hoping for a swift takedown, but your timing is off, and you almost slide back into the brine. A Carthaginian spear cracks your shield rim, wood splintering into your ribs. Pain flares, but you grit your teeth and stagger forward, pinning his arm under your boot before driving your blade home. He gasps once, then goes limp. Fratricide and friendly fire. Just as you catch your breath, a hail of Romano-Roman confusion descends. Archers from a neighboring trireme mistook your hull for the enemy's. 2 ships had collided in the melee and merged into a single unholy silhouette. Suddenly, feathered projectiles slam into your back, embedding in your spine like garish souvenirs. You whirl around to shout at the bow archers, but before you can curse them, another volley from your own Marines arcs overhead. The words, "Hold your fire," echo uselessly. Arrows continue to rain down until both sides realize they're shooting at themselves. You see a brother-in-arms crumple, an arrow shaft jutting from his throat. His glaze-eyed stare meets yours in the final moment, and you wonder if he's cursing you or fate. You lower your sword and kneel to rip the arrow free, but the captain's horn blasts, signaling the final push. There's no time for mercy. You stand, shoulder-clad in gore, and charge into the crumbling remnant of the enemy deck. The deck become a body. Pile. Boarding parties swarm the stricken vessel like locusts. Marines grapple in pairs, shields raised, thrusting gladly through seam and chainmail. Water sloshes around ankles, carrying the bodies of the dead to drip off the deck's edge. You hack at an enemy legionary who thought himself safe in the captain's cabin. His panicked prayer for mercy is cut short by a brutal slash. You glance at his outstretched hand, empty. He had no gold, no treasure, nothing beyond his fleeting life. Behind you, a drunk centurion whose nerves have shattered seizes a reluctant slave by the throat and hurls him overboard to appease Neptune. The slave's frantic screams die in the water. You avert your eyes. This is what the sea demands. Betrayal in the ranks. Just when you think you've got control of the captured deck, a shrill whistle splits the air. It's your own signal, the order to abandon ship and transfer prisoners to your damaged galley. But some of your Marines, greedy opportunists, interpret it as loot everything. They start pillaging the enemy's treasure chest, prying open chests of pearls, amphorae of oil, and clay jars filled with coins. You try to restore order, but the fever of plunder has infected the crew. In the scramble, one Marine jabs you in the shoulder, thinking you're an enemy too. His baton catches you off guard. You're slammed into a bulwark beam. Pain explodes across your chest. Your shield flies out of your grasp and clatters into the sea. You clutch at your breastplate, testing for mortal wounds. Blood seeps through your fingers. Nearby, the ship's quartermaster watches, mouth agape, then saunters off to barter a handful of silver staters for a pair of boots. The retreat. The surviving enemy rowers, shackled and dripping, are shoved into your galley as makeshift oarsmen. You're ordered back to your own deck, and the helmsman yanks the rudder over, turning your battered galley away from the wreck. As the two ships part, the enemy trireme sinks like a corpse dragged under by its own dead. No explosive, just gravity pulling its broken hull below. Men on both sides cheer, then slump in exhaustion. You stagger to the bow, lean over the rail, and heave up half-digested hardtack. The sea is littered with debris and half-drowned bodies. You reach out for a floating hunk of timber and grasp it like a lifeline. A rat scrambles across your hand, alarming you enough to let go and catch your breath. You recall that 80 men on the other ship drowned in the ram explosion, 45 were taken prisoner, and perhaps a dozen swam to shore, only to face punishment for collaborating with Rome's enemies. The toll on mind and body. As your galley rows for the next rendezvous point, you sit on a broken shield boss, legs trembling. Your muscles shake not only from exertion, but from the shock of so much violence. A messenger hands you a new ration of stale cheese and wine diluted with seawater. You barely taste it. Your mind drifts to the last letter from home. Your mother begged you to come back, saying that wheat is cheap this year, and your little brother learned to read. You wonder if the price of peace is too steep. You glance at your torn tunic. Each rip tells a story of near misses, of splinters yanked from flesh, of one too many thrusts of the gladius. Your body is a map of pain, each bruise and laceration a meager trophy compared to those immortalized in Rome's triumphal arches. The aftermath, deadly cavils of victory. At the fleet's assembly point, your admiral strides aboard, imperious and unbloodied, as if the sea's carnage were nothing more than an afternoon stroll. He surveys your galley's casualties, 10 dead, 20 wounded, 5 missing. He dismisses the missing as likely driftwood fodder. You fight the urge to retch. He congratulates you on a job well done, another step toward Rome's dominion of the waves. He proclaims. He collects the captured sails as trophies and orders your galley to resupply before pressing on to the next engagement. No pause for mourning, no moment to wash the blood from your hair. You're handed a roll call list, expected to report missing men. 1 slave, 2 marines, a centurion's nephew. No chance to grieve. The sea waits for no man. A moment's reflection. Before the next storm, as you watch carpenters hammer fresh planks into the hull, you realize that naval warfare is a cycle of collide, slaughter, repair, repeat. There's no glory here, only the endless churn of wood, water, and blood. Yet you stay, because leaving means conscription into another legion, maybe digging trenches in Persia or building walls on the Rhine. Some fates are worse than drowning. You grip the oar when it's your turn to row, no rest for the weary. The drum returns, and with it, the rhythm of servitude. You lean into each stroke, muscles quivering, visions of home flickering in your mind. Somewhere out there lies a quiet farm, where wheat sways in the breeze and life is measured by the sunrise. Not the crash of iron against wood, but today you're bound to the galley. A single oar among hundreds propelling Rome's war machine forward. You push off the memory of torn sails and mangled corpses, focusing instead on the beat of the drum, the call of the centurion, and the faint hope that someday this endless battle will end, and you'll live to tell the tale. Tune in for part 3, where we'll follow your chase after pirate strongholds, plunder mysterious coastal cities, and, just maybe, encounter a sea monster worthy of your nightmares, Samian pottery not included. You'd think after surviving the blood-soaked decks and friendly fire fiascos of conventional naval battles, you'd get a moment's respite, maybe a nice Mediterranean breeze and a quiet patrol. Nope. Instead, your admiral shoves you right into the unsavory business of anti-piracy operations, a glorified rat hunt across the craggy coasts and hidden coves of the ancient world. The hunt begins. At dawn's first blush, your galley slips out of port, oarsmen still blinking sleep from their eyes. Word on the docks is that a band of Cilician pirates fortified themselves in a cliffside grotto near Lycia. Hardly a quick trip, but pirates pay exquisite dividends in ransom, plundered amphorae, and the occasional free galley for the taking. You row in near silence, hearts pounding at the thought of lumbering into a hidden bay, bristling with enemy ships. On approach, your captain signals to anchor 2 stades offshore and send out scouting boats. You volunteer because nothing says career advancement like paddling through fog toward jagged rocks, hoping you don't become fish bait. The scout boat's wooden hull groans under your weight, and you grip your oar as lookout, peering for glints of enemy armor or the twitch of a watchman's palm. The sea around you is eerily calm, too calm. Entering the pirate's lair, steering the scout alongside a reef, you slip into a narrow inlet no wider than 2 spears' length. Stalactites drip above, and barnacled walls echo every splash. Somewhere ahead, the pirates have rigged lanterns, tiny flickers of light dancing on the water like malevolent fireflies. You hear muffled voices chanting, then laughter, probably the last thing a prospector ever hears before a grizzly bear clobbers him. A lookout taps your shoulder and nods. You exchange hand signals, anchor the boat, creep forward, and wait for the torch signal. A sudden whoop cracks the silence, and dozens of pirate ships slide into view, their prows carved into snarling beasts. Jolly Roger-style flags flap overhead, emblazoned with skulls biting into ships' hulls. Your heart stutters. This isn't an easy raid. This is a death trap. Ambush and escape. No sooner do you signal back than a hail of flaming arrows floods the inlet. The hull of your scout bursts into screaming splinters. You duck, rolling into the water, clutching your sword in case a pirate tries to board you mid-swim. You tread water, spitting seawater and curses as other oarsmen flail and sink. Above, the lanterns blaze to life, spotlighting you like prey. With a thunderous shout, the pirate chieftain steps onto a ledge, brandishing a curved cutlass and snarling in an accent you can't parse. Something between a dagger's hiss and a barnyard squawk. Without orders, you kick off toward open water, dragging 2 wounded comrades behind you. Each stroke is agony. Salt stings fresh wounds. Behind you, the inlet erupts in roaring flames and racked timbers, pirate war cries bouncing off cavern walls. Gasping, you reach your anchored galley just as pirates swarm its deck. The lookout's horn blasts. Your captain orders all oars to stand by. You scramble aboard, platform boards slick with oil and gore. Marines slam hatch lids shut and lower the boarding ladders. Oars strike water, and the galley backs out of the inlet under a hail of fire. A flaming javelin skitters across the deck, igniting a pile of rope. You stomp it out with one boot, leaving a charred imprint that later becomes a sailor's talisman. Siege of the coastal stronghold. Freshly escaped, the admiral vows not to abandon the mission. Instead, he opts for a full-scale siege of the pirates' coastal fortress, a ruined Roman watchtower perched atop a 200-foot bluff. You approach under cover of darkness, marines ferried in small boats, scaling ropes dangling into the black. You're assigned to the landing party. Congratulations. You get to climb a rope ladder soaked with seawater, pray it holds, and then fight uphill. By moonlight, you scramble onto crumbling battlements, stones slick with moss. A lone pirate guard spots you and sounds the alarm. A booming horn that echoes through the hills like doom incarnate. Suddenly, bolts of fire fly from hastily erected catapults, rocks wrapped in burning cloth arcing toward your landing zone. One smashes into the rope ladder's anchor, sending it swinging like a pendulum of death. You leap sideways, grabbing a loose brick. Behind you, men scream as the ladder snaps. You duck, hurling the brick at a pirate archer. Crack! His scream echoes off the stone walls. You clamber upward through a chaotic melee, marines shouting orders, pirates pushing burning logs down the stairs, and the smell of gunpowder from early Greek fire prototypes. Close quarters, carnage. Inside the fortress courtyard, it's a madhouse. Narrow corridors funnel troops into choke points. You wedge your shield between 2 flickering torches and advance, stabbing at cloaked figures in ragged tunics. The courtyard cistern, a deep pit filled with brackish water, seems to rise up and swallow men who stumble on the uneven stones. One marine's foot slips. He plunges head first into the muck, paddling upstream like a drowning man until your comrade yanks him out by his hair. He coughs up pond water and curses the admiral's mother. On the tower's battlements, you find the pirate chieftain once more, sword raised and eyes blazing. He vaults off the parapet onto your rank's captain, who parries clumsily. Sparks fly as steel meets bronze. You charge, delivering a gladius thrust through the pirate's side. He staggers, wraps his arm around you, and tries to pull you over the edge. You twist free, drive your blade again, and watch him collapse over crumbling stones, disappearing into the courtyard below. The pirates surrender moments later, or perhaps they flee down hidden passageways you never learn about. The fortress falls with a thud. Banners torn down, armor clatters, and the wind carries your cheers across the coastline. You boast to your comrades, but the victory feels hollow. So much blood for a single ruined tower and a handful of amphorae. Monsters of the deep, or just the grease weasel? Triumphant, you board your galley for the journey home, expecting calm seas. Instead, your helmsman spots something glimmering beneath the water's surface. A massive, serpentine form, scales drifting like overturned coins. Your heart pounds. Sea monster! Ancient mariners spoke of the Ketos, a leviathan that capsizes entire fleets on moonless nights. You grip the rail as it breaches, not a mythical beast, but a gargantuan school of fish, perhaps tuna, disturbed by the hull's vibration. They leap in thrashing arcs, smacking oars and hull with thunderous thwacks. Still, the shock jolts your senses. For a moment, you half believe Neptune summoned his children to feast on Roman rowers. You brace yourself for monstrous tentacles, or at least a school of rabid dolphins. But the tumbling fish disperse and the sea returns to its usual indifference. Wounds, loss, and a whisper of home. By the time you reach the fleet's rendezvous, your body aches like a bargain basement marionette. You've lost 8 men in the inlet ambush, 14 in the fortress assault, and 30 more scurvy victims behind decks you'll never see again. Each casualty leaves a void, a favorite oarsman's bench now empty, a fellow marksman's bow left unstrung. Your captain tallies the treasure, a few jars of olive oil, a chest of coins enough to buy a small villa if smuggled past customs. He awards you a commendation, a bronze medal stamped with Neptune's trident, and hands you a new assignment slip before you can even catch your breath. Teaser for Part 4. As you watch the sun glitter on the waves, you ponder your luck, barely alive, perpetually broke, and bound to the next nightmare. But in the distance lies another challenge, trading blows with a rival fleet off the coast of Sicily, mastering deadly boarding contraptions, and perhaps encountering a creature straight out of the poet's wildest fantasies. Stay tuned for Part 4, where we face the infamous Battle of Lilybaeum, dodge flaming catapults by moonlight, and discover that in Roman naval warfare, the real horror often comes after the victory cheers have died away. Leaning against the rail of your battered galley, you taste salt and burnt pitch on the wind, an acrid reminder that even victory smells like ruin at sea. The Battle of Lilybaeum looms ahead, a clash so brutal that historians whisper of ships set ablaze by flaming catapult shot, crews driven mad by the heat, and the black smoke of burning timber blotting out the Sicilian sun. If you thought boarding actions and pirate sieges were bad, strap in. The final act of your maritime nightmare is about to begin, the calm before the storm. Dawn breaks on the harbor of Lilybaeum like a cruel tease, pink clouds glowing over placid water, gulls wheel lazily overhead, and fishermen cast nets into still quiet coves. Your admiral gathers the captains on deck, issuing orders in clipped Latin. Form the line abreast 2 ships thick, hold at the west channel, await signal at the 3rd trumpet blast, then ram and board in tight wedge formation. Seniors nod, veterans roll their shoulders, and brand new recruits gulp down the last of their rancid porridge. No one dares speak of second thoughts. You take your place among 50 galleys, each vessel a world of chaos, oarsmen crammed in hulls, marines loading ballistae, cooks hastily stowing the morning's meager rations. The air hums with anticipation and dread. Sweat beads on every brow, not from heat alone, but the knowledge that once the signal is given, there's no turning back. Signal fire and smoke. At high noon, the signal tower near the city walls erupts in smoke. A single column drifts upward, then vanishes into cloud, the prearranged queue. 2 trumpeters raise their horns. The blast cuts through the harbor like battle cry, and death knell all at once. You grip your oar, heart pounding in your ears like a war drum. The fleet surges forward, hulls bumping in unison, and creaking timbers groaning under the strain of synchronized thrust. A breeze carries flecks of volcanic ash from Mount Eryx, dotting your tunic with gray flecks, nature itself conspiring to cloak the sea in menace. Ahead, the Carthaginian line bristles, triremes and quadriremes, decked with mercenary marines, crossbows cocked, defenders ready to unleash firepots, earthenware jars filled with pitch and tar, once your ships creep into range. The first impact, you feel the thrum through the hull long before you see the enemy ram. From your vantage, the prow of a massive quadrireme looms, ram's bronze beak aimed square at your bow. You row in tempo, but amid dozens of ships, even the slightest miscount veers you off course. The enemy's ram crashes home with a jarring concussion. Wood splinters into the hold, seawater gushes in like a wounded beast. Screams echo from below. Marines scramble to clear the debris. You're jolted, nearly pitched overboard. Blood and oil slick the deck. The acrid smoke of early Greek fire curls through the air. Defenders on that ship douse flaming arrows from above, but those same arrows drift onto your deck, setting spare oars and rope alight. One man, eyes wild, hurls a bucket of water only to slip in the flooding tide and slump against the bulwark, coughing seawater and ash. Boarding frenzy 2.0. Your captain bellows, "Corvus deploy," and the dreaded boarding bridge swings across the gap like a metallic guillotine. You charge, shield forward, sword glinting in the smoke-filtered sunlight. The gap narrows to 8 feet. Every foot gained risks that plank snapping under weight, or another ram slamming you into oblivion. You leap across as sparks shower down, landing in a hail of enemy thrusts. The deck you land on is a furnace, tar bubbling underfoot, men clashing in tight quarters, the clash of steel ringing like hell's bell. You parry 2 blows, then drive your gladius through a Carthaginian's throat. He collapses, eyes rolling back, lifeblood pooling around his sandals. A comrade grabs you by the arm. "Granati incoming!" Hand grenades filled with nails and incendiary powder, hurled by giant slingers stationed on the enemy's catwalks. You duck behind a battered shield boss. A grenade roars overhead, snapping wood and sending nails whistling past like malevolent bees. Splinters embed in your calf. You grunt, wrench free, and make a desperate lunge toward the catwalk ladder. Each rung is slick with ash. Every upward stroke you taste iron and sweat. When you reach the top, you shove aside a slinger mid-throw, sending him stumbling backwards. He falls into the swirling sea below with an explosion of pitch. Smoke, fire, and desperation explosions erupt as enemy engineers launch Greek fire jars, oil-based incendiary, through bamboo siphons onto your deck. Flames leap like living creatures, devouring timbers, singeing hair, and turning shields into molten death traps. Fellow Marines hack at burning beams with axes. Makeshift water jets from leather bladders sputter ineffective drops of seawater. You kick a flaming piece of debris overboard, then lunge at a panicked foe wielding a hooked pike. Suddenly the deck tilts alarmingly, too many bodies piled on one side. The galley heels over, oars emerging from the water at absurd angles. You slide toward the gaping hull breach, clang into a fallen drum, and bounce back, scrambling to stay upright as the ship rights itself. Every roar of the sea feels like the madding crowd in your skull. Stay alive! Stay alive! The turning point. Just when all hope seems lost, when your arms feel like they'll rip from their sockets and your lungs burn with smoke, a crash reverberates through the carnage. One of your comrades on the stern oars has rammed a lightly defended trireme, blasting through both hulls in a thunderous dual ram. The double breach sends a geyser of seawater cascading across decks, extinguishing flames and disorienting the defenders. Your captain shouts, "Counterattack!" The tide turns, fresh reinforcements from nearby allies sweep in, ramming 2 more enemy vessels. Archers on your stern rain down bolts. Marines surge over boarding bridges. The enemy falters, disorganized by the sudden breach in their line. You seize the moment, hacking through tangled limbs and shouting with every ounce of breath left in your lungs. Aftermath on the deck. When the smoke clears, you stand amid a tableau of devastation. Smoking wrecks adrift, bodies tangled in rigging, seawater crimson with blood. The air tastes of ash and charred flesh. Survivors, in red tunics, green shields, rise from the pit, wounded but victorious. You lean on a shattered mast, knees shaking, glance at your reflection in an oil slick, gaunt face, wild eyes, beard caked with smoke. Medici hurry along the deck, tearing shreds of wool into bandages, slapping poultices on gashes that smell of vinegar and tar. You mumble for vinegar, more vinegar, and are dragged to the rail, where you pour down the ascetic sting onto a deep cut across your forearm. Pain flares so bright you momentarily see stars, but it's better than drowning. Bitter, victory, and hollow. Spoils, The admiral convenes surviving captains on the rotten deck of his flagship. He tallies losses, nearly half the assault force's galleys disabled, 500 men killed or missing, twice as many wounded. The Carthaginian fleet is scattered, roughly 24 ships sunk, the rest limping back to harbor. Beneath the thunder of drums and the blare of trumpets, you feel nothing but a hollow ache. Loot is collected, a handful of exotic goods, ivory combs, jars of North African perfume, coins stamped with foreign faces. Most of it is waterlogged or burned. Few prizes survive the inferno. You receive your share, 2 silver denarii pinned to your tunic, enough to buy a crust of bread in Ostia if you can find it. The long row home. Weeks later, you limp aboard a transport headed back to the heart of the empire. The voyage is a blur of waves, fever, and nightmares. Every creak of the hull sets your nerves jangling. Every shadow in the hold looks like the shape of a fallen comrade. Food rations consist of salted fish and stale barley cakes. Water is rationed to a single cup per man per day. When your lips crack and bleed, you slip away to lick condensation from the cargo hold walls. Quarantine awaits at port. Survivors crowded into pens to check for plague, dysentery, and other maritime maladies. You wait in line for the medic, who pokes through your wounds with ungloved hands, mutters Latin curses, and prescribes more leeches. An attendant scribbles your name on a ledger. Gaius Maximus, galley rower, severe PTSD, 8 wounds, 1 missing thumb. Reflection, the real cost of survival. Finally discharged, you return to the river port where you once enlisted, a place now alien. Your home village, or what remains of it, is but a memory. Fields overgrown, neighbors moved on, the inn boarded up. You wander dusty lanes, the weight of silence heavier than any catapult stone. A shopkeeper offers you work hauling grain for half a denarius. You decline. Your muscles ache from idleness, but your spirit recoils at the simplicity of farm labor after the furious chaos of war. You find a quiet stretch of riverbank and sit, watching the water glide by like indifferent fate. You dip a hand in, think of your oar, once an instrument of service, now obsolete. You contemplate throwing it away, but the weight of those wooden blades feels like a tether to all you endured. Instead, you cradle it like a relic. Epilogue. Why you wouldn't survive. By the time your hair turns gray, you'll tell tales of rows in darkness, blades flashing beneath flaming skies, and the hot iron of enemy rams piercing hull and flesh alike. You'll mention lost friends, Livius who fell overboard, Marcellus who succumbed to fever, Octavia who drew breath one final time spouting curses in Punic. You'll laugh, sardonically, bitterly at the word glory, for naval warfare carved its name not in triumph, but in trauma. If someone ever asks why you wouldn't survive a Roman naval battle, you'll reply, because survival demands perfect timing, inexhaustible strength, and a heart colder than Neptune's heart. You need to outrun flaming arrows, outmaneuver war galleys, outlast the urge to give in. Even then, victory is Pyrrhic, body broken, mind scarred, spirit drained. So raise a cup of watered-down wine, of vinegar, of the tears of your lost comrades, and toast to those who never came home. Your oar rests by your door, a silent testament to what you endured. And every dawn, when the wind rustles the reed beds, you swear you hear the distant drum, beckoning you back to the deck, to the inferno of Lilybaeum, to the unending grind of Roman naval warfare. But you won't answer, because some battles are best left behind. Hey guys, imagine waking up shackled at the wrist, dawn light slicing through crude wooden slats, and the first thing you smell is fear mixed with the stench of unwashed bodies. Only you're the star attraction in someone else's shopping spree. 10 seconds in, and you're already calculating whether a month of hauling stone would be preferable to this public humiliation. Part 1. Thrust into the arena of human commerce. You arrive in the Forum Boreum before sunrise, herded through narrow alleys by armed lictors who treat you like livestock rather than a man. The slave market sprawls beneath the towering temples of Rome, marble giants that sneer down at your stripped form. You stand barefoot on sun-baked cobblestones, your tunic ripped away, muscles glowing under your pallid skin. The breeze carries the smell of incense from nearby sacrifices, mingled with body odors so pungent it could peel paint. Registration and branding, first order of business. A ledger clerk jots your product ID in a wax tablet, noting age, origin, and any special skills. If you speak Greek or can weave, That might fetch you a higher price. Too bad you only know your native tongue and fought off a bear once, skills deemed impractical by fashionable Romans. Then comes the branding iron, a red-hot glyph seared onto your shoulder, indelible proof you're property of Gaius Sextilius, who hopes to flip you before lunch. The burn sears deeper than any memory, and blackened flesh drips onto the pavement. Nice first impression, right? The inspection parade. A parade of buyers circles you like vultures at a carcass and inspecting teeth, nails, and muscle tone. One portly senator pokes your ribs with a jeweled cane, murmuring about deficiencies. A patrician matron pins her nose at your calloused feet, lamenting poor grooming, as if you had time for pedicures. You cough to clear the dust from your lungs, and a young equestrian sneers. He might breathe too loudly on my villa guests. Each comment shaves coins off your market value, leaving you wondering if you'll be condemned to the brickyards or the brothel. The waiting pen. After inspection, you shuffle into a crowded pen with dozens of others, men, women, children, all stripped to loincloths, awaiting the midday auction. There's no shade here. Midday sun bakes your back, and the only relief is the occasional splash of water from a bored guard. Conversation is futile. Everyone's too busy praying for escape, or at least a purchase by someone merciful enough to spare the cold whip. A child 2 pens overcries for her mother, and you choke back tears because crying might lower your price further. Auctioneer's spectacle. At the crack of noon, the auction begins. The auctioneer, a booming lacquered orator, struts atop a raised platform, calling out names and lots. Your lot 37, sturdy young Gaul, reliable laborer, minimal vices. Your world narrows to the polished toes of onlooking elites and the clink of minted coins. Each bid echoes like a tolling bell. 20 denarii, 30, 40. You pray to Neptune for a miracle, but fortune favors the buyer, not the bought. A wealthy landowner raises his hand, a single gesture that seals your fate. You're sold. The gavel falls, and a chain guard snaps the manacle from your wrist, only to clamp new shackles around your ankles. As you're led away, you glimpse the last of your dignity trailing behind you, caught in the coarse rope binding your arms. The first steps toward your new home. Your buyer leads you through the bustling streets of Rome. Inscribed stones line the way, testaments to emperors, jaded generals, gods you've never worshipped. Merchants hawk fish and honey. Children chase hoop and stick games. Philosophers drone debates in the shadows. None of it is for you. Your future is the villa's cellar, the fields under the Italian sun, or the kitchens where your only ambition is not to be whipped for burning a stew. As you trudge alongside the brick wall bearing reminders of Rome's grandeur, you wonder, how did a free man become a commodity in this city of marble and might? And more pressingly, what horrors await you beyond the threshold of that iron-studded door? Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll dive into your buyer's true expectations, the brutal training rituals of household slaves, and the tipping point when hope becomes a luxury you can't afford. Congratulations. You've survived the slave auction, just barely, and been claimed by Gaius Sextilius, a mustachioed equestrian whose bilious smile suggests he views you as nothing more than a biological tool. As you trudge behind his gilded litter through narrow side streets, you realize the worst is yet to come. This isn't a market transaction, it's your personal descent into the nightmare of Roman domestic life, the villa of endless labors. At last you arrive, a sprawling villa with marble columns and manicured gardens. The outer courtyard boasts statues of ancestral heroes, but your world will be the inner atrium, and eventually the cellar annex. You're ushered inside through a grand entrance hall, tiled with scenes of victorious legions, and then down a dim corridor, where echoes of hammering and hushed sobs fill the air. Your first assignment, scrub the peristyle garden's mosaic floors until they gleam. You kneel on cold marble, elbow deep in soapy water that stings your raw knees. Slave overseer Marcus stands over you with a cane, barked warnings ready on his lips. "Faster!" he snaps. "I want every tessera brighter than your future was before Rome chewed you up." Each stroke of your rag scrapes skin away, and by midday your arms burn as if branded by hot iron. The welcome whipping. By sunset, your tunic is damp with sweat, your hands cracked and your spine aching. Instead of rest, Marcus orders you to line up with other newly purchased slaves, 2 Greek tutors, a Nubian cook, and a trembling teenage girl from Hispania, for your welcome initiation. You shiver in the dusk breeze, ankles bound as he brandishes a leather whip. With every lash, the whip's thongs crack like punctuation in the evening air. He scores your back 10 times, reciting a litany of sins, slowness, slackness, insolence, even though you've yet to utter a word. Your back blossoms with welts, each a blossoming rose of agony. You bite your lip to keep from crying out, but a guttural sob escapes on the 10th strike. The girl next to you wails. Marcus laughs. "Good," he says. "Let this remind you who owns you. Master and household hierarchy." Bruised and gasping, you're ushered into the triclinium, dining room, to witness your master's dinner party. Reclining on couches draped with silk pillows, Gaius Sextilius and his guests sip diluted wine, while senators argue theology and extol the virtues of Pax Romana. Meanwhile, you and the other slaves crouch in the shadows, invisible specters who provide no value beyond muscle and silence. A young patrician woman, Livia Cornelia, orders you to fetch more olives. You obey, trembling as you fumble with the silver dish. She swats your hand with a jeweled fan and demands, "Be more graceful, barbarian." You manage to spill half the olives onto the mosaic. The abrasive click of her fan across your knuckles leaves bruises, literally and figuratively. In this household, ranking matters. The lanista, slave overseer, wields authority over the servile ranks. Educated slaves outrank unskilled laborers. Freedmen enjoy more privileges, but everyone is beneath any freeborn child. Your master's own children romp through the atrium, tossing grapes into each other's mouths. You imagine being hurled into the fountain just for sport, and realize the villa's serenity is a facade masking rivers of cruelty. Daily grind, dawn till dusk. Your schedule settles into a grim pattern. At first light, you awaken in the slave quarters, a low-ceilinged chamber deep in the villa's substructure, where dozens of hammocks sway in the gloom. There, rats scuttle across the dirt floor, and the air reeks of moldy hay. You rise, groggy and sore, and begin a day of unrelenting toil, hauling firewood, carrying water from the well, beating laundry on river-washed rocks, grinding grain by hand, and tending the sweltering kitchens. By midday, you cart manure from the latrines to the gardens, flayed by the sun and swarmed by flies. Each scoop of excrement reminds you that no job is too lowly for a slave, and that refusal equals the lash. The cook, a scrawny Syrian with twitching eyes, occasionally tosses you scraps of stale bread. You chew gratefully, even as the stench of rotting vegetables and rancid oil threatens to choke you. Afternoon brings polishing tasks, bronze lamps, silver goblets, even the helmets of Gaius Sextilius's household guard. As you buff metal, your reflection wavers in the gleaming surface. Haunted eyes staring back, asking, "Is this the destiny you chose?" The education of an indoctrinated slave. Despite the horror, there's an odd attempt at training within the villa. The 2 Greek tutors hold lessons for a handful of favored slaves, reading basic Latin, reciting odes to Apollo, and practicing rudimentary accounting for those earmarked as bargain clerks. You're forced to learn a few memorized phrases, bene tibi, damen, good for you, master, so you can speak only when spoken to. Every mistake costs extra chores. Heads rattled with Latin declensions, you stumble through recitations while the hysterical laughter of your fellow slaves echoes off the marble walls. The entire exercise feels like training for a new kind of torture, one of the mind, where ignorance is punished alongside physical failure. Sabotage, solidarity, and suspicion. Underneath the brutality, tension simmers among the slaves. The Greek leather worker, Demetrius, quietly teaches you how to produce shoddy leather straps for sandals, just enough to cause the metal studs to loosen and the sandals to disintegrate. The teenager from Hispania, Catalina, has memorized every hidden corridor in the villa and maps them in her mind for an escape that might never come. You share stolen crust of bread and whispered prayers under the slave quarters hatches, forging a fragile solidarity. Yet trust is precarious. A half-broken Gaul named Silvanus once whispered hope of revolt, only to be dragged out at night and never seen again. Marcus later boasts that Silvanus ran into a wardrobe door, an explanation so absurd you half believe it only to spare your own sanity. Nightmares of the weeping walls, As darkness falls, you're herded back to the slave quarters, where the lantern's glow reveals the hollow faces of the beaten and broken. Sleep brings no peace. The whip's crack echoes in your dreams, each lash awakening your senses. Night terrors find you thrashing beneath the hammock, screaming for freedom that tastes like ash. Occasionally, you're summoned for late-night duties. Today, for example, you must polish the master's ceremonial chariot wheels under a full moon. As you kneel, buffing bronze, you glimpse statues of Venus and Mars towering over you. Their eternal stone smiles mock your plight, immortal gods in a world where mortal lives spill like water on the cobblestones. The tipping point, a moment of defiance. On the sixth dawn of your servitude, you reach exhaustion's edge. The day's chores have left you gasping, and your back's welts have turned purple. Marcus's whip is dryly poised above you at any challenge, sometimes brandished during routine tasks, just to remind you of your powerlessness. That afternoon, you're charged with carrying a massive marble bust of Caesar from the atrium to the library. The statue's weight crushes your shoulder joint. You stagger and nearly drop it, inching it across the mosaic floor. A decanter slides behind you. You step on it, it shatters and oil spills across the tiles. A horrid slip stuns you and the statue begins to tip. In reflex, you catch it, but the momentum flattens your finger beneath marble, snapping it with a sickening crack. You howl in pain and the household guard rushes in. Marcus appears, lips curling. He examines your fractured finger with clinical detachment, then wraps the metal studs of his sandal against your foot. Careless, he spits. Now you've damaged property and hindered commerce. He drags you by the hair to the courtyard. Before the assembled guests at Gaius's afternoon reception, senators, merchants, a visiting envoy, you're stripped to the waist, and Marcus lays down the whip. Each lash cleaves through your flesh, the third one tearing your finger's wound open anew. Blood arcs through the air like malicious art. The guests avert their eyes or sip wine in polite silence. No one intervenes. Bruised, bleeding, and broken, you're dragged back underground. Marcus mutters, "Let that remind you who holds the power." You bleed into the dirt, tasting copper on your tongue. Blood, sweat, and humiliation all fused into one bitter draught. A flicker of hope in the darkness. As you press your torn hand to your chest, one finger gone, two more mangled, you realize survival here demands more than stoic endurance. It demands cunning, alliances, and the willingness to risk everything. Catalina slips you a fragment of clay tablet bearing the villa's hidden guard rota. Demetrius promises forged keys, and together you whisper of escape at the next full moon. Yet you know the danger. Guards patrol constantly, the walls are thick, and betrayal carries a death sentence. Marcus's eyes scan the slave quarters nightly. One wrong word, one misstep, and you'll end up a cautionary corpse displayed at the villa entrance. But even here, under the lash, under the brand, under the weight of despair, you feel a spark, the unquenchable will to live as a man, not as property. It glows faintly in your chest, hard as a stone, transforming fear into resolve. Teaser for part 3. Next time, we'll follow your daring midnight escape attempt, dodging torchlit sentries, navigating bobbing boats in the canal, and confronting the true cost of freedom. Spoiler, you might find that the world beyond the villa's walls is no kinder to a former Roman slave than the master you left behind. Stay tuned. Night drapes over the villa like a silent executioner. Lanterns gutter in the courtyard, and the moon casts treacherous shadows along the slave quarters' cracked walls. You slip from your hammock, every muscle protesting, and pull on the ragged tunic Catalina pressed into your hand. Tonight is the moment you traded welts for whispered hope, and you're about to test whether courage can outweigh shackles. Sneaking past the night watch, you press your back against the cool stone and inch toward the hidden corridor Catalina memorized. Marcus's patrols circle like bored vultures, torches bobbing, voices slurring with wine. Timing is everything. Breathe when their backs are turned, freeze at the clank of armor. You slip past the first guard, his helmet nearly grazing your shoulder, then hold perfectly still as he stomps by, muttering about damned slaves and their silent footsteps. 2 corridors later, you reach the canal tunnel, a narrow chute leading beneath the villa's foundations to the network of aqueduct-fed waterways that wind beneath the city. Demetrius kneels by the barred grate, whispering, Your key. He fits the forged iron into the lock. It clicks. You slide the grate aside and step into knee-deep water, bracing against the slick stones. The subterranean river. The tunnel stretches for yards, water lapping at the walls, dripping from overhead joints. You guide Catalina by the shoulder. Her eyes shine in the lamplight's reflection from above. Every echo sounds like pursuit, the scrape of sandals, distant laughter, the drip-drip of water turning into a staccato panic. The air is thick with mildew and the stink of stagnation. You swallow bile, wondering if you'll ever taste clean air again. At the tunnel's bend, you surface into a broader channel, the villa's private hideaway to the Tiber's lesser branches. Small skiffs bob at hidden docks, covered by tarps. You and Catalina slip into one. Demetrius tugs the grate back into place, whispering, "Go." He presses a small pouch into your hand, enough coins to buy a fishing boat's fare downriver. Then he vanishes into the darkness. The canoe and the conscience. You push off, paddling silently toward the canal's mouth. The water is oily under moonlight, and every ripple seems to whisper threats. Drain and drown. Catalina trembles beside you, her youth more a curse than a blessing. You want to reassure her, but every word feels like a betrayal of Marcus's lash. She grips the paddle like a lifeline, eyes fixed on the distant glimmer of city lights. Behind you, the villa's silhouette shrinks, its marble columns ghostly pillars against the night sky. You let yourself imagine safety, a boatman downstream who'll take you across the Tiber, beyond the city walls, into the hinterlands where no villa master's criers can reach. But freedom's price looms: starvation, exposure, fear of recapture. You draw the paddle through water that smells like history's foulest crimes, slavery's stench mingled with moonlit algae. Betrayal in the dark. Halfway down the canal, two shadowy figures rise on the bank, a pair of city guards, sentry swords glinting. You freeze. One raises a lantern. Its glow reveals familiar faces: the Nubian cook and the teenage girl, Catalina's former companion. Horror seizes you. Demetrius's map led you straight into Marcus's trap. You grip Catalina's wrist, heart hammering. The guards step forward. "Going somewhere?" The Nubian cook sneers, voice thick with betrayal. You realize that under Marcus's iron rule, loyalty is a commodity as easily traded as you were. The girl's eyes, once bright with hope, are dull with fear and regret. Before you can plead, swords slip free of scabbards. The clash. On water. You shove Catalina toward a hidden lock gate, yanking on the lever. Water sluices in, tilting the canoe wildly. You scramble to brace yourself as the guards leap in, cutlasses swinging. The first guard's blade arcs toward your neck. You duck, rolling the canoe until he loses his balance and falls overboard with a splash that echoes like a death knell. Catalina screams as the second guard lunges. You parry with the paddle's handle, biting back a cry of pain when it snaps under the strain. With no weapon, you grab the guard's wrist and wrench him across the gunwale, sending him tumbling into the canal. He resurfaces, sputtering curses, but you shove off, sculling away with frantic strokes. Through the city's underbelly, you reach the lock's exit and burst into a half-dry channel that snakes beneath crumbling warehouses. Firelight flickers through broken windows, illicit taverns and gambling dens where ex-soldiers trade gold scars for whiskey. You pad the canoe up shallow shelves, paddling with your hands, avoiding planks that groan under weight. Catalina cradles her bleeding ankle from the guard's kick. Above, a bell tolls. Midnight. You know Roman law decrees harsh penalties for runaway slaves and anyone aiding them. Every echo of that bell feels like a summons for your execution. The waterway bends, opening onto a quiet quay. Torches flicker as fishwives gossip. Stray dogs slink in the shadows. You nudge the canoe into a recessed alcove and push off silently, carrying Catalina from the skiff. The river's final embrace. Two merchants lounge by a jettied boat, drunkenly arguing about olive oil prices. You stumble up the stones, cupping your mouth to whisper desperation. "Help! I'll pay!" The older merchant squints, then shrugs. He leads you to his beached fishing boat, casts off with one oar, and tugs Catalina aboard. "Quick!" he rasps, "or you're dead men." Under a canopy of stars, you glide onto the Tiber's open current. The city's lights recede. No longer do you hear temple bells or villa fountains. Instead, the river hums with frogs in the distant call of a night watch. Your muscles burn, arms shaking from paddling, heart pounding with fear and exhilaration. Catalina leans back, dizzy, and you press a flask of water to her lips. She drinks gratefully, lips quivering. The taste of freedom and its cost. As dawn bleeds into the sky, you spot willow-lined banks and fields beyond the city's walls, olive groves and far hills tinged gold by sunrise. You exhale, tasting freedom's bitter tang, relief laced with dread. You gave Demetrius's coins to the fisherman, enough to vanish into the countryside, but not enough to erase your past. Catalina turns to you, eyes wide. "Where will we go?" she whispers. You place a bruised hand on her shoulder, knowing words fail. Ahead lies the uncertain world, hungry roads, shelterless nights, the ever-looming threat of slave catchers and Marcus's wrath. Yet, for this one fleeting moment, you've outrun the lash and the ledger. Teaser for Part 4. In Part 4, we'll follow your perilous trek through the Italian countryside, forging false papers, bartering with disreputable smugglers, and confronting the truth, that escaping slavery is only the beginning of another battle. Will you find safety, or merely another master in a cloak of freedom? Stay tuned. You've slipped the villa's manacles, outrun the lash, and paddled through a Tiber-lined underworld. But freedom in the Roman world isn't a gilded chariot waiting at the city's edge. It's a gauntlet of new masters, false promises, and the ever-present sting of betrayal. In this final act, you'll learn that escaping one form of servitude often means stepping into another, and that liberty can be as perilous as the market itself. Dawn on the Via Appia. Before sunrise, you and Catalina stumble onto the dusty stones of the Via Appia, the queen of roads that heaves southward toward Campania. The road is already alive with merchants, soldiers, and travelers bound for distant ports, their voices full of gossip and goat cheese sales pitches. You stoop to hide your ragged tunic beneath a traveler's cloak, bought with Demetrius's last denarii. In its folds you tuck a crudely drawn scroll. Free-born Roman citizen, named Lucius Valerius, age 23, penned by a smuggler with more gall than skill. Catalina limps beside you, clutching her ankle where the guard's boot splintered bone. You bind it with torn cloth, grimacing at the makeshift bandage's stench. "Keep moving," you whisper, but every step on that ancient pavement feels like walking on shards of pottery. Sharp reminders that safety is still a distant city gate away. The smuggler's ruse. By midday, you crest a hill overlooking a roadside taberna, plastered with charcoal-scrawled "rooms for rent" signs. A gaunt figure in a threadbare tunic beckons, the smuggler who sold you your identity scroll. He squints at you, hands you a pair of faded sandals and a palm-sized token stamped with a provincial magistrate's seal. "Show this? Say you're on official business in Capua. They'll let you pass," he promises, voice raspy from years of haggling without water. You pay him another handful of coins, your life's last currency, and watch him melt back into the crowd. Catalina's grip tightens on your arm. "And if they see through it?" she gasps. You force a grin. "Then we learn the art of persuasion," you say, but your heart pounds like a pounding in a godforsaken forge. Checkpoint at Castellinum. As the sun dips low, you approach Castellinum's checkpoint, a stone arch manned by 2 vexillari, imperial guards, who eye every traveler like they're examining a lazy tunic's stitchwork. You clutch your token, step forward, and adopt a carriage you hope reads "confident official." "State your business," snarls one guard, his nostrils flaring like a gladiator smelling blood. "Provincial census," you intone, voice steady, shades of schoolroom recitations from Part 2's humiliating lessons. "I am to verify landholdings in Campania on behalf of Prefect Marcus Aelius." You brandish the magistrate's seal, the guard sniffs it, then turns to his colleague. They confer in clipped Latin. Catalina trembles behind you. Finally, the guard nods. "Proceed," he grunts. As you pass beneath the arch, the sun's last rays carve long shadows, your own shape distorted, an omen that freedom may stretch you into someone you never meant to be. The itinerant worker's trap. Campania's fields are a patchwork of olive groves and vineyards. each estate tethered to the local elite who hire wanderers to prune vines or press grapes. You and Catalina find work at a small latifundium just beyond Capua's walls. The overseer, a gaunt-faced freedman named Tiberius Florinus, offers you meals of stale bread and watery wine in exchange for grueling labor beneath the burning sky. At first, it feels liberating to swing pruning hooks instead of rags and chains, but soon you realize this arrangement is another gilded cage. Tiberius pays you in tokens redeemable only at his warehouse store, where flour costs 3 tokens a loaf and wine 5. When your turf tax paper proves useless here, you discover you're trapped in a barter system as cruel as any marketplace sale. The harvest revolt weeks pass in a haze of almond-scented dust and aching shoulders. One evening, Diablo, an ex-legionary turned sharecropper, rallies fellow laborers to demand real coins or freedom. Under a chaste tree, torches cast jittering light on angry faces. You're on the fence. Fight and risk the lash, or stay silent and starve. As shouts crescendo, Tiberius sends his guards, armed slaves loyal to his household, and the scuffle turns brutal. Diablo falls to a cudgel blow, others are dragged away in manacles. You help Catalina to her feet and melt into the olive groves, hearts pounding as guards pursue. You spill through the trees, desperate for the cover of dark vineyards. The revolt fails, but the seed of defiance grows in your chest, proof that survival sometimes demands rebellion. Sea breeze on the Bay of Naples, fleeing Campania, you hitch a ride on a coastal fishing barge bound for Puteoli. The sea breeze stings your blistered skin and washes away the dust of the fields. Catalina leans over the rail, watching foam swirl around oars like phantoms. For a moment, the salt air tastes of hope, but aboard the barge, you're no longer a slave, nor an official, but stowaways, smugglers of desperation. The captain favors a bribe of your last denarii for safe passage. He sneers, better to drown than rot on the Appian road? So you pay, and huddle with other vagrants in the hold, each of you chasing freedom like a mirage on the horizon. Refuge in the shadow of Vesuvius, Puteoli's port is a swirl of smoke from charcoal kilns and the pungent tang of fish sauce. You tiptoe through narrow streets lined with garum shops, seeking sanctuary in a run-down insula, apartment block, where freedmen charge exorbitant rent for a berth in a cell-like room. Your landlord, a gaunt Greek named Nicostratus, binds a crust of bread and an amphora of water to a rope and lowers it weakly into your cell. Pay by sunset, or you don't eat. Each coin you scrape together disappears within days. Yet Nicostratus's Klieg lanterns illuminate graffiti reading, Libertas audaces juvat, freedom favors the bold. You and Catalina scrawl that motto on your wall, a silent oath. The cost of a new identity. Months slip by in this half-freedom. You barter your skill at mosaic repair for food. Catalina mends linens at the public baths. Neither legal nor entirely free, you exist in a gray zone. Too poor to attract the praetor's notice, too resourceful to be easily recaptured. One dawn, you slip a change of tunic under your cloak, press forged papyrus scrolls into your breast. New names, new birthplaces, and step onto the crowded quay. Catalina's eyes glimmer with tears and relief. You purchase 2 tickets on a merchant ship bound for Sicily. A new frontier, new masters, and perhaps a chance to become anonymous. Final reflection. The endless marketplace of men. As the ship crests each wave, you gaze back at Italy's outline fading in the dawn mist. You think of Gaius Sextilius smirking over his ledger, of Marcus's whip scarred into your flesh, of the villa's polished floors now traded for olive grove dust, and the wine-splashed docks of Puteoli. Each stage of freedom felt like a transaction, whether for a slave token, a day's labor, or a fugitive's passage. In the end, you realize why you wouldn't survive a day in a Roman slave market, because the world beyond those iron shackles never truly frees you. Liberty in Rome is measured by the weight of coins, the favor of officials, and the sharp edge of a blade, whether on the auction block or in a smuggler's dagger. You stand on the prow, Catalina beside you, wind tearing at your hair. The merchant captain barks orders, sails unfurl like wings. You close your eyes and swallow salt-edged air, tasting uncertainty and possibility in equal measure. Your future is as vast as the Mediterranean, but each sunrise will remind you that freedom is a currency more volatile than gold, a price you'll pay every day until your story finds rest. And that, my friends, is why you wouldn't survive a day in a Roman slave market, or perhaps why you'd never want to leave. Keep your chains, keep your coins, and remember, sometimes the greatest bondage is the one you carry inside. Hey guys, picture this. You're sprawled on a narrow deck at dawn, the Nile's mist curling around your bare toes, and the first thing you taste is damp reed smoke and yesterday's rancid fish, only you can't escape because you're roped to a mast. 10 seconds in, and you're already questioning your life choices. Was that grain shipment worth signing aboard a floating coffin? Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Part 1, signing on for a one-way voyage. You answered the call for sailors in Bucyrus, lured by promises of grain, gold dust, and exotic goods from Punt. The recruiter, a sunburned wretch named Hapu, boasted ample rations and steady pay, which translated to half a loaf of flatbread, a thimble of beer, and maybe a handful of barley at month's end after Hapu's cut. But you're desperate. Taxes to pay, debts to the temple scribe, and a wife back home who thinks you're off to the stone quarries. Better a ship than a quarry, right? The vessel, a reed boat, masquerading as a ship. On arrival, you find your ship is a patched-up cedar hull, keel with plastered sides, rigged with a single square sail, and oars so small, you wonder if they were carved by a bored artisan. The deck's nothing but woven mats laid over beams, no railing, no shelter, just open air and the promise of sunburned shoulders. Your captain, a grizzled man named Renenutet, yes, like the goddess, surveys you with eyes like hot coals. No welcome speech, just a bark. Stow your gear and bind your feet. We leave at first light. The crew, a motley curse. Your fellow sailors range from a former oarsman on a war galley, now missing an arm, to a Nubian cook who complains about the heat, to 2 kids who giggle at the idea of hauling heavy sails. They've all been whipped by the desert sun and river mud. None have seen a real storm, just enough Nile waves to know that big water is no joke. They glance at you with mild curiosity, another landsman who'll soon learn that seaworthy is a generous term. Rations, the culinary torment. First meal on board, cold lentil stew so salty it doubles as a preservative, and beer brewed from overripe barley that tastes like fermented socks. Fresh meat is unheard of. Instead you gnaw on dried fish that crumbles into sawdust in your teeth. Water is rationed in small clay jars, drawn from the river full of algae and mosquitoes. One slip and you swallow a live mosquito larva. Yum. Nightfall brings a communal dread. Your hammock is a simple rope strung between 2 posts, swaying you above the deck. Rats, big as kittens, scurry below, and the humidity turns every inch of your skin into a sticky swamp. You curse the recruiter's promise of dry nights. Duties, a never-ending gauntlet. At dawn, the first command, hoist the sail. You drag on a hemp rope that bites into your palms until they're raw. Then, row, and the oarlocks barely clear the water. You heave in unison with the crew, muscles screaming, sweat blinding your eyes. Each stroke feels like hauling a stone Nile boat upstream. Drops of sweat drip into your eyes, stinging like fire. When the wind dies, you live off your muscles alone. The sun climbs, the decks heat like an oven. You tumble off your bench, cramp seizing your leg, and nearly slam your head into a wooden beam. A sailor nudges you awake. "Hurry, scab!" And you throw yourself back to the oars before Renenutet's lash finds your back. Storm brewing, nature's cruel reminder. By late afternoon, dark clouds gather over the river's horizon, an ominous sign. Egyptian sailors fear the desert winds that roar across the water, whipping waves into frothy monsters. Renenutet orders sail lowered. You scramble up the mast, slick with sweat, and wrestle the sail into coils. Lightning flashes, and the crew hushes, each lightning crack sounding like a god's whip. Then the wind hits, a sudden gale that rips the sail from your hands and sends you sprawling. The ship heels, and you slip on blood-slicked deck, from a butchered goat's carcass they stored for cedar repair. Water floods in over the gunwale, the hull groans. You cling to the mast as if it's the only promise of survival. A near-death lesson. The storm rages for an hour, long enough for you to taste terror in every drop of rain. Waves crash over the deck, carrying away your sandals and half the provisions. The cook yells to bail water. You scoop with a chipped clay bowl until your arms feel they'll fall off. When the wind finally dies, you're soaked, freezing, and your teeth chatter. The few fish you caught in the chaos are too small to eat. As the sky clears, you realize the vessel's leaking. Water sloshes beneath your feet with every wave. Renanutet forbids turning back. The sail of this cargo depends on you fools, he growls. So you bail more, patch holes with scraps of linen, and wonder if you'll ever see solid ground again. The teaser. Dangers ahead. By nightfall, the Nile banks reveal crocodile eyes glinting in the torchlight, nature's silent sentinels waiting for feast. You dream of home, but know that between here and the delta lies a labyrinth of shifting sandbars, treacherous whirlpools, and raiders in painted boats who see you as easy prey. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll navigate the river's deadly sandbanks, dodge crocodile attacks, and discover that the worst storms sometimes come not from the sky, but from the mistrust of your own crew. The morning sun glares down on your soaked tunic as you kneel on the deck, scooping sludge out of the bilge with the chipped clay bowl you prayed you'd never see again. Around you, jaded crewmen curse the storm gods, carve notches on the mast to count your near deaths, and eye each other with the tired suspicion born from close quarters and dwindling provisions. You realize quickly that while the Nile is capable of killing you with its waves, it's the men beside you who might finish the job. The river's shifting sands. No chart guides you on the Nile's mercurial moods. Today, the current pushes you toward a notorious stretch called the Serpent's Back, an ever-changing chain of sandbanks that can rip a hull as easily as a crocodile's jaws. Renanutet barks orders for lookouts to ascend the crow's nest, two lanky youths who fought over the next ration of beer since leaving Busiris. They squint through cracked spyglasses and shout, "Port! Starboard!" as the riverbed heaves beneath you. At the first warning, you and half the crew leap to haul on the oars in unison, trying to steer clear of the sandbar that suddenly thrusts itself out of the water like the spine of some giant waterborne lizard. But the oars catch in the mud, yanking your shoulder out of its socket. You scream, the sound lost under the scrape of wood on sand, and collapse as the galley heels, splintering the hull. Water pours in through the cracks, mingling with the storm's remnants still trapped below deck. Patchwork repairs and misplaced faith. Forced to ground the vessel until the midday tide rises, Renanutet orders emergency repairs. He hands you a bundle of oily linen strips and a bucket of pitch salvaged from the butcher's goat carcass. With hands still trembling from the storm, you daub pitch into the gash, only to feel it ooze back out the other side like a guilty secret. One of the former galley oarsmen, a broad-shouldered ex-sailor who brags about his voyages to Punt, snatches the pitch from you and slams it into the wood with a rock. Splinters fly into your arm, nicking a vein. You taste copper. The crew forms a ragged semicircle around your bleeding arm. Instead of offering bandages, they jeer, "Weakling, can't even mend a ship's wound." The Nubian cook tosses you a stale flatbread, hard as a brick, and mutters, "Work off that injury or walk back to Busiris on foot." You realize any sign of weakness here marks you for scorn or worse. Crocodile Alley. By afternoon, you're bailing water with so much vigor that your muscles feel as if they'll tear free from their bones. The sun's descent brings cooler air, but also the lurking menace of crocodiles. The crew jokes about snapping bugs, but their laughter is hollow. At the keel's tip, you spot the telltale triangle of a scaly jaw breaking the surface. A shout goes up. "Croc!" Two crocodiles glide alongside the vessel, eyes locked on the motion of oars, easy prey in a weakened state. Renanutet commands the harpoon team, two grizzled veterans armed with gleaming iron hooks. They lean over the railing, jabbing at slimy green hides, each failed toss a thrill of terror for you. One miss sends the harpoon whistling past your ear, embedding itself in the deck with a sickening crack. Wood splinters, pitch weeps from fresh wounds. Finally, the harpoon finds its mark. One croc jerks, flails the blood into the water, and slips beneath the surface. The other retreats, disappearing into a cove of tangled reeds. The crew exhales a collective sigh, heavy with relief and unspoken fear that the river watches them now. The illusion of solidarity. That evening, huddled around a single smoking brazier, the sailors share memories of home. A brother's wedding feast, a father's orchard, a cousin's farm on the Mediterranean. Even the cook recalls his mother's spiced stews. You offer your own story of a wife you swore you'd return to, and heads nod in understanding. A fragile camaraderie blooms as night falls, embers dancing in tired eyes. But under the cloak of darkness, bonds fray. You awake to muffled voices and see the Nubian cook tugging the ex-galley oarsman aside. They stare at your hammock, running fingers over the bundle of barley you've been hiding for strength. Their eyes flick to the brazier's dying glow, and you know they hunger for more than camaraderie. They hunger for survival at your expense. Betrayal, under the moon. Half an hour later, you're jolted awake by the snap of hemp rope and the hiss of dagger steel. Before your mind registers, the ex-oarsman's fist connects with your jaw, hard enough to ground you. The cook leaps on the other side, blade at your throat. That barley was ours, he spits. The next ration's ours. Pay tribute or die. Your pulse pounds as you struggle, but the two overpower you, stronger from weeks of rowing. You realize there's no justice on this ship except the might of the blade. You raise your hands, the ex-oarsman jerks a bag of barley from your hammock. They vanish into the shadows, leaving you bleeding and furious. The captain's indifference morning arrives with no apology. Renanutet barks for all hands on deck to hoist sail. You stagger to your station, jaw swollen, arms weak, but you row, because the captain's lash is ever present and even more immediate than death by mutiny. When you muster the courage to approach him about the attack, he shrugs. Keep your grain under lock and key. The Nile is full of sharks, both kinds. You swallow your pride and rewrap the wound with a scrap of sailcloth, mindful that infection is as lethal as any dagger. The crew watches in silence, some with pity, others with barely concealed satisfaction that you've been humbled. A glimpse of desert shores. By midday, the river widens and the smudged green banks give way to golden dunes. You've left the crocodile-infested reaches behind and entered the stretch known as the Caravan Coast, where desert traders land to barter ivory and ebony. Sails flap lazily in the breeze, and for a moment you imagine docking. Desert winds drying your wounds and merchants trading barley for passage. But Renanutet holds firm. Grain for Rome, he repeats like a prayer, not for desert nomads. So you push on, muscles straining, oars biting water that tastes of salt and sweat. The dunes loom closer. The sun hammers your skin like a smith's hammer on iron. Cliffs of sand and the sandstorm's wrath. Late afternoon brings a sandstorm, a roiling wall of ochre dust that descends without warning. The crew scrambles to shield eyes and mouths with cloth, but the storm moves faster than their clumsy hands. You're blinded, half buried under shifting dunes of sand that swirl across the deck in choking waves. Sails and rigging howl in the wind. The mast thumps ominously. Crew members shout orders you can't hear. The ex-oarsman, coughing up grit, falls against the railing and disappears overboard. His scream is stifled by the storm's roar. The cook staggers beside you, sputtering curses as he tries to pull you down from the mast. You cling tight, tasting sand in every breath, mind reeling. When the storm subsides, you find the hull scratched and scarred, the rigging half shredded in 2 empty oarlocks, silent testimony to the crew's losses. No bodies wash ashore. The desert swallows all evidence. The thin line between madness and survival. As night falls again, the battered crew gathers for a meager stew. Nothing but water, sand-caked grain, and a fish head that looks more like a fossil than food. The Nubian cook stares into his bowl, then pushes it away. Better to starve than swallow grit. He rises and disappears over the rail, vanishing into the darkness. Only 5 of you remain. Renanutet, the grizzled captain, you, ragged and bleeding, the 2 crow's nest lookouts, terrified but determined, and a young deckhand too green to realize that life at sea is worth less than the wood beneath your feet. You realize then that the real storm is not of wind and sand, but of the human heart. Betrayal, fear, and the desperate hunger for survival have turned the Nile's promise into a gauntlet of cruelty. Teaser for Part 3. Stay tuned for Part 3, where we push beyond the Delta's reeds into the Mediterranean's open waters, facing pirate raids, battling scurvy and madness, and discovering that ancient seafaring's greatest dangers often come not from nature, but from the choices of desperate men. Dawn breaks on the Delta's reed-filled channels, and your reed boat pretending to be a ship creaks into the open sea. Behind you, the Nile's green banks shrink into a ribbon of papyrus. Ahead lies the vast, salty expanse of the Mediterranean, where danger isn't measured in crocodile bites, but in pirate-brandished daggers, rotting meat, and the jumbled gods of old. Strap in, because if you thought river travel was a nightmare, the sea is a swirling abyss of epic fails. From grain, barges, to high seas, vulnerability, the river current that once pushed you along now turns fickle. It slaps your stern, drags you sideways, and sends crashing waves over your plank-thin deck. Ren knew it, squinting at a battered sun-bleached map of the delta outlet, mistakes a swirl of foam for a hidden inlet, only to run aground on a reef disguised as seaweed. The hull groans. You scramble to bail water with whatever vessel isn't already missing chunks. By midday, half your rations have floated away, and you're subsisting on salted fish bones and a single clay jar of murky water. Scurvy's silent siege. Days pass, and your crew's teeth rattle like castanet shells. Without fresh produce, scurvy creeps in, gnawing at gums and limbs until simple tasks, hauling sails, heaving oars, become exercises in agony. The first victim, the younger lookout, whose legs swell until he can barely stagger to the wheel. Instead of sympathy, you're greeted with one less mouth to feed. He coughs black blood into the sea, and you realize that on this ship, illness is a death sentence, not a sick day. Pirate smoke on the horizon. On the 7th morning, the lookout in the crow's nest squints at the horizon and cries, "Sails!" 2 of them. Heart in throat, you spy dark triangles carving through the waves. Cilician pirates, masters of sudden strikes and heavy drinking. They fly jagged flags in man-sleek galleys that glide like hungry wolves. Renanudit orders you to hoist the square sail to outrun them, but the wind has other plans, a stubborn breeze that blows you directly into the pirate's path. The boarding of pain. The pirate ships close in with terrifying speed. Their archers loosed flaming arrows that whistle overhead. Some land in the rigging, setting sailcloth ablaze. You dart across the deck, hacking at flames with a length of spare linen until your fingers are red and blistered. As their hull slams against yours, a boarding bridge, a plank with iron hooks, clangs into place. You shoulder barge your way through, only to find yourself face to face with a scar-lined buccaneer who smells like sweat and spilled amphorae. Steel flashes. You parry with your oar's handle, splinters driving into your forearm. A slash across your thigh sends you sliding into a coil of rope, gasping. Behind you, Renanutet is already on the stern deck, hurling insults and bucklers, but mostly insults because his only weapon is a stubby dagger you suspect he stole from the cook. The pirates surge aboard, weapons raised, and the deck becomes a blood-slicked scramble of desperation. Betrayal. Under black flags, amid the chaos, the Nubian cook, once the scourge of your barley stores, sidles up, face twisted in fear. He grabs your arm, whispering, "They promise clemency if we guide them to the cargo hold." You yank free. He slumps to his knees. You realize the loyalty of starving men is worth half a ration. As pirates barrel past, you sprint below deck, only to find the hold's hatch bolted shut. You batter it with your haft until the pirates above drag you up by your tunic. Cargo tossed, crew taken. The pirates rip open the hold, and sacks of grain tumble into the sea like greasy pearls. They laugh, pouring handfuls of gold-stamped tokens into their pockets. Then one hefty pirate barks, "New crew for our galley." They snap your arms behind your back and shove you toward their waiting vessel. You're not rowing. You're cargo now, bound by wrist and ankle, crammed among broken amphorae and panicked rats. Renanudit's fate is worse. They tie him to the mast and force him to dance a drunken jig on deck until he collapses, rejected for his lack of muscle. You trade glances, once comrades, now competitors for survival. The pirate galley's benefits package. Under black flags and crude oaths, you row with the pirates, 1,000 strokes per shift, no rest, no bread beyond a stale chunk doled out for breakfast. Your back spasms, your knuckles bleed. The pirate captain, a hook-fingered brute named Horace No Good, tours the ranks, poking at faces. "Try to keep pace, landlubbers," he sneers. Each man you pass is bludgeoned. No one wants to be last. By night, weak as you are, you're tasked with manning a fire pot. An iron cauldron of flaming oil hung at the prow to deter boarding enemies. The sail's burnt remnants dangle above you. The wind keeps billowing smoke into your eyes. You cradle the pot, praying the rope holds. If it snaps, you'll be the first roasted at sea, plague of rats and lust. In the cramped galley hold, rats the size of kittens feast on spilled grain, and on the flailing wounded. Their squeaks echo in darkness as they chew at your sandals, your bones, your bare flesh when you sleep. Sleep is rare. Nightmares of falling into the Nile are replaced by visions of rats dragging you into the bilge. Atop deck, the pirates raid coastal villages at night, dragging back terrified women and children, spoils of war. You're ordered to herd them like cattle before Horace No Good's inspection. You witness tears, pleas, and torches flickering against fear. One girl stares at you with such desperation that your oar slips, missing a stroke. A pirate's whip cracks across your back. You raise a fist in rage, but the whip halts in midair. The girl grabs the whip handle and snaps it in two, then shrieks and vanishes into the hold. Miracle or madness. As dawn bleeds over the sea, you find her. The girl, free, brandishing the whip's broken length. She turns to you, eyes wild. "Come with me," she hisses, beckoning toward a coastal inlet. You glimpse a smuggler's skiff hidden in reeds, your only chance. The pirates are still drunk from the raid, singing sea shanties in tongues you don't recognize. You nod to the girl, who leaps into the water. You follow, dragging your chains. Each step is agony. The sea churns at your knees. The pirates finally notice, cutlasses raised, but the girl shrieks and hurls a lamp at the deck, igniting pitch and feathers in a roaring blaze. Smoke chokes the pirates. You both sprint into the inlet and clamber into the skiff. The pirates stumble into the flames, hacking at the blaze with oars. You shove off and paddle furiously, chains chafing at your wrists. The girl bails water with a clay pot, her courage burning brighter than the fire you left behind. You strike out for open water, each stroke a prayer to the gods. Sekhmet, protect us. Sobek, guide us. Ra, please, spare our hides. As the coast's palm trees shrink in the distance, you collapse in the skiff, chest heaving. The girl presses a flask of fresh water to your lips. "Thank you," you rasp, voice raw. She only nods, eyes fixed on the horizon. Teaser for Part 4. In Part 4, we'll chart your perilous drift along Phoenician shores, braving starvation, political intrigues in Tyre and Sidon, and the ultimate test of your seaworthiness, crossing the storm-tossed waters back to Egypt. Will you ever reach home, or will the ancient sea claim you as its final cargo? Stay tuned. Dawn's pale light creeps over the Phoenician coast, revealing the battered skiff that carried you and the freed girl, Merit, away from the pirate inferno. As you both cling to the cracked oarlocks, you realize the real trial begins now. Reaching Egypt on 2 scraps of wood, no food beyond a few stale olives, and no promise that home will recognize you. Scavenging straits and fading strength, the first day's crossing is a blur of salt spray and aching muscles. Each stroke toward Egypt's shores feels like lifting the weight of a lifetime of regrets. You trade the last of your barley for a handful of sun-dried figs from a coastal fisher. Merit passes you 2 crusts of dry bread. Hunger gnaws so fiercely that your ribs feel like brittle reeds. You dig a finger into your pocket and find a single copper stater, worth nothing here. By noon, the sun's fury has blistered your back and baked the sea into shimmering waves. The skiff's sides gape with cracks, and water seeps in faster than you can bail. You grip the oar's edge, white-knuckled, as Merit stuffs ragged linen into the hole's seams. With every effort, your strength ebbs. You cough, salted with choking waves, and eye the distant coastline of the Nile Delta, still days away. Visions of land and the mirage of salvation. On the second dawn, you glimpse what you hope is the lighthouse of Alexandria, a distant column of smoke rising above low dunes. You paddle toward it, desperate, only to discover smoke from burning reeds. Locals clearing land or signaling boats, no matter. Your heart sinks. The illusion vanishes, leaving only the open sea and your collapsing limbs. Merit watches you with fierce eyes. "Rest," she orders, pulling you into the bottom of the skiff. Your vision dims as she drapes her cloak over your sunburned shoulders. For the first time, you're truly afraid of dying. You swallow back the panic that threatens to claw through your throat. Storm of the gods and judgment unleashed. Late in the afternoon, thunder rumbles beyond the horizon. You hear it as a judgment, an omen that the gods aren't done with you. The wind picks up, lashing the skiff with heavy gusts. Merritt grabs the oars as you stagger to help. Your coordination is gone, replaced by frantic desperation that only drives the boat sideways. Waves break over the bow, flooding your meager refuge. A lightning bolt splits the sky, illuminating the water in a stark flash. You see Merritt's face, etched with fear and resolve. She plants both oars and drives forward, using every ounce of her strength. You grab the other oar and row in time, paddling not just for life, but for the promise of redemption. Shipwreck and resilience. As night falls, the storm crescendos. The skiff is battered, and one final wave smashes the weakened hull open. Water rushes in, ice cold and blinding. Merritt and you cling to the splintering wood as the skiff breaks apart. You grip a floating plank, she seizes another. You're tossed in the dark, adrift in a churning grave. Miraculously, dawn finds you washed onto a marshy inlet near Sunken Island on the delta's eastern fringe. You pull yourselves ashore, collapsing on reed-choked mud. Your bodies are cut and bruised, your spirits near broken. But you're alive, and alive is enough. The delta's unforgiving welcome. The marsh offers little refuge. Biting insects swarm, and foul water breeds sickness. Merritt finds a trickle of fresh water from an underground spring. You both drink greedily. She guides you toward a distant palm grove, where a group of fishermen haul nets. Their shouts echo through the reeds. When you stagger into view, they circle you warily, spears raised. You raise filthy hands, trembling. One fisherman steps forward, beckoning you to his campfire. He offers flatbread and goat's milk. You taste the primal sweetness and weep. Your body shakes with sobs, a mixture of relief and the knowledge that you still owe a heavy price for freedom. The long trek to home, replenished but fragile, you follow the fishermen upriver toward the Nile's deltaic branches. Days stretch into a haze of reeds, canals, and endless portages. Each crossing demands payment, labor, stories, tribal favors, until your last copper token vanishes. You trade your oar-wearied muscles for passage on a scow laden with fresh vegetables destined for Memphis. On the scow, you meet a temple scribe returning from Thebes. He listens to your tale of the pirate raid, the storm, the shipwreck, and finally nods. Your name must be struck from the slave rolls, he says. He promises to petition the local magistrate to have your enslavement nullified. You clutch his hand, voice catching as the reality of freedom inches closer. Home at last, and the cost of survival. Weeks after signing aboard that trade ship, you finally glimpse the pyramids rising above the green floodplain. Each step along the quay feels surreal. In Buceras, Hapu's apprentice does not recognize you as the slave he once recruited. You wear a new tunic, your scars hidden beneath linen wraps. You seek out your wife, her eyes wide with disbelief as you spill your story. Crocodiles, mutiny, pirates, storms, shipwreck, madness, and mercy. She presses you to her breast, weeping. You promise never to leave again, but you know the promise is brittle. The Nile's call will always linger in your blood, a reminder that survival demanded surrender and sacrifice at every turn. Epilogue: why you wouldn't last. So why wouldn't you last as a sailor on an ancient Egyptian trade ship? Because the Nile's embrace is as lethal as its beauty. Because promises of fair pay unravel like reeds in the current. Because men turn on each other when fear rules the waves. Survival here is a tapestry woven from luck, grit, and the mercy of strangers. You survived, but barely. Your life is a ledger of debts paid in blood, sweat, and salt water. And every time you hear the river's gentle roar, you remember that true freedom on the Nile was never guaranteed. It was a temporary harbor in an unending storm.